we here? Good morning, YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook. How is everybody? We were not live yesterday because we were at the wedding of our head of estate planning law for the law firm here in Mombasa. So that was a great time. We enjoyed that. Hope you're enjoying your day, Rachel. Always love it when we can celebrate something. That celebration was definitely needed. My father just died 4 days ago, so it was nice to go to a wedding and see kind of the opposite of the end, see a new beginning. So I appreciated that yesterday, but that's why I was not here. And so we're back. All right, there's some festivities yet today, but I had the time to go live here in the morning and deal with that later on in the afternoon. So yeah, we are back, and maybe you'll see some video of the wedding on some of our socials since she is a director with the organization. So keep your eyes open for that. All right, so we are talking about the real cost of relocating, either individually or as a business, expanding your business into Kenya, which is one of the largest parts of what we do. So, what's the real cost look like to relocate? Well, first thing you got to do is you have to immigrate legally, right? Even if you're expanding your business, you need the right to do business in a foreign country. It's not automatic, right? Most immigration departments worldwide, right, universally, part of their mandate is to make sure that foreigners are not taking jobs from locals. That's part of the mandate of immigration, period, right? So you can't just open a business in someone else's country, right? You need a permit to do that of some sort. Here in Kenya, that permit is called an investor's permit, right? Even though for a lot of us that originate from the West, we hear investor and we think stocks and bonds. You don't need a permit for that, right? You need a permit to operate a business as the owner, and that's called an investor permit. If you're working for a company, that's a work permit. Okay, very different things. Now, in some countries like China, it's appropriate for you to open your own company and then sponsor yourself as an employee. That's appropriate in some countries. Kenya is not one of those countries, right? In Kenya, that would be a false conveyance. False conveyance means that you essentially lied on a legal document. Okay. So in Kenya, if you're going to own the business, you need to have an investor permit. So even if you're not moving here, when we set up businesses for clients here, they need an investor permit, even if you're not going to be here, right? Because they're owning a company. And in the eyes of immigration, there are certain things that in the eyes of regular people don't constitute the possibility of stealing a job, but do in immigration. One of those things is owning a company, right? Most people who own companies, myself included, feel like we're creating jobs, right? We're not taking jobs from anybody, we're adding jobs to the economy, right? But immigration services sees it differently. The other big disconnect between immigration and what people kind of take as common sense is volunteering. In the eyes of immigration, someone who can afford to volunteer because maybe they come from a different country that maybe is doing better, right? Or maybe a richer country. In the eyes of immigration, if that person was not available to volunteer for free, then that organization that they're volunteering for may have had to hire a local person. That's the view of immigration, right? Right or wrong, that's typically the view of immigration globally. So even volunteer work is considered work by immigration, right? And that's why people who are in the United States without working papers, who volunteer for like local churches and stuff, sometimes violate their visas and get deported for working without a work permit, even though they weren't being paid. Because in the view of immigration, if you were not there to volunteer for that job, then that employer may have had to hire a local person, a citizen, to do the job. That's just their viewpoint, right? Not going to debate it because I can't change immigration policy. Just let you know how it works. So, if our clients who are not actually moving here, they're just opening businesses here, they still need investor permits. Okay. Now, clients who are moving here, there's a plethora of permits that they might need. Okay. Even our business clients, there are niche businesses that have their own permits, like mining. There's a mining permit if that's the business you're going to do, right? So, our people who are relocating here typically have to make one decision. And that decision is, do you want to become a citizen of Kenya someday or not? If you don't want to become a citizen, there's a plethora of options for you where you can just become a permanent resident or never become anything. Always just be an ordinary resident or, whatever the case may be. For those folks who do want dual citizenship eventually, their only direct option is a Class K ordinary residency permit, right? Now, unfortunately, the internet becomes like a game of telephone, right? Remember that game that we played in school? You whispered in the friend's ear, and by the time it got to the end, the message was completely different. So a lot of people will call an ordinary residency permit a retiree visa. It is not a visa. Visas only grant you entry into a country. They do not allow you to do anything in that country. And it is a permit, and it is not a retirement permit. The age limit on an ordinary residency permit is 35 years old. It is not a retirement permit. Now, if you are retired, typically retirees, you've been there, typically retirees qualify for the permit, right? By the virtue of like their retirement pension or their social security or whatever, right? Because what you need to qualify for that permit is you need $2,000 a month of guaranteed income because you don't have working papers as an ordinary resident. So you cannot work in Kenya as an ordinary resident. But after 7 years of being an ordinary resident, you will qualify for dual citizenship, which allows you to have, number one, a second passport. We talked about passport portfolios our last live. Hey, how's it going, Gritty? We talked about passport portfolios our last live. And, hey, see you later. We talked about what that means and how that gets you into different capital markets. That might be your first passport in your new passport portfolio if you're relocating here. And it removes all restrictions, including land restrictions, which we'll talk about later. So you get a new passport, you now have dual citizenship, all restrictions are removed, most likely in all the countries that you're a citizen, and you go from there, right? So if that is not something that you want, and it's not something that everybody wants, interestingly enough, we have a client that we just onboarded 4 days ago. They don't want dual citizenship. It's not part of their strategy, right? So they actually want permanent residency. And so permanent residency is similar to citizenship, same as in the United States. You'll see a lot of times it'll say you need to be a U.S. citizen or a green card holder, right? Or a lawful permanent resident. That's a green card, right? Same type of thing. You need to be a citizen or a lawful permanent resident. But land restrictions are part of the Constitution, right? So land restrictions do not disappear until you become a dual citizen. All right. So dual citizenship is required to remove all restrictions, but you can live here permanently as a permanent resident. All right. So there's that. And so it really just depends on the strategy. Remember, we were talking about Singapore when we were talking about having a passport portfolio. Singapore does not allow for dual citizenship. In order to get a Singaporean passport, you have to give up all your other passports. But the incentives to families who are investing, right, and to families who have that structure where they invest as a family, the incentives to being in Singapore are extreme, right? The benefit outweighs the loss of your passport portfolio. So typically when families get to that level, they sacrifice a member as far as the passport portfolio is concerned. They sacrifice a member's, flexibility in having multiple passports, and that member becomes the designated Singaporean, right? And so that member will end up going to Singapore, giving up all the other passports, and they'll run the family office from Singapore. And of course, the family itself will typically incentivize that member, paying them a really nice salary out of the family office, and and giving them control over that. Essentially, gives them control over family investments. So it makes them a really important person in the family, right? So it's a bit of a promotion, even though they lose their passport portfolios. And by that level, typically the family has a passport portfolio of 10 or 12 passports. Like by the time they get to the point where they want to start doing things like that in Singapore, they have an established family. They've been around for a little while, and there's quite a bit of money in that family. All right. So those things happen. So there's things like that where, like if that individual wanted to then expand business into Kenya through us, those are the types of individuals who will say, no, no, not looking for dual citizenship, because they know they're not going to give up their Singaporean citizenship, right? So not looking for dual citizenship, just looking for permanent residence, and go from there. Now, again, Kenya doesn't require you to give up anything. It's not like Tanzania, right, which requires you to give up your own citizenship in order to relocate there. Kenya wouldn't require you to give up a citizenship, but it's the benefits that they would lose from, a place like Singapore that would then have them say, hey, listen, strategically, I just want permanent residence. So we do have clients that'll come in and say, no, 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 it doesn't matter if I'm here for 100 years. I just want permanent residence. I don't want dual citizenship. All right. So that's number one. What do you want the outcome to be? We even have some people who are like true digital nomads and like, oh, no, no, I'm just going to be here for 4 years. I just want to be here legally for those 4 years. I don't want to be looking over my shoulder. Right? And there's a digital nomad permit for that. So that's question number one. What is your impact going to be? And what do you want to be at the end of the journey? Do you want to be, a digital nomad and move somewhere else and experience somewhere else now for 4 years? Do you want to be a permanent resident, like a green card holder type of situation? Or do you want dual citizenship, right? The majority of our clients want dual citizenship. Okay. And so what ends up happening is, if they plan on doing business here, you have two separate situations. You either choose not to do business here until you're a dual citizen, right? Then you do business as a citizen, right? Or there's a lot of situations, and this does make it more expensive, but there's a lot of situations where there are couples involved, right? And so you can get citizenship via marriage. It doesn't make anything any faster, right? There's no fast track to citizenship. It takes 7 years, period. Okay. But if there's a couple and one wants to do a business, one wants to kind of work while they're here, and the other one, or not even the other one, but they also want dual citizenship. If you get an investor permit, it's not a direct path to dual citizenship. It's a direct path to permanent residency, but that's not dual citizenship. So if your goal is dual citizenship, but you're also trying to do some work, and you're a couple, then what'll end up happening is the couple that really wants to do the work will come in as an investor permit, which doesn't lead to dual citizenship, right? The other couple will come in as an ordinary resident permit, which does lead to dual citizenship. So once they get to the ordinary residency permit phase, and that they've been here for 7 years, the both of them, right? And now that ordinary resident is able to become a dual citizen. What'll end up happening is they'll go through the citizenship process. Our immigration attorneys will handle all of that. They'll come out the other end a dual citizen, and then will bring their marriage certificate from, abroad in, and that person who didn't qualify for dual citizenship because they came in as an investor permit will now qualify for citizenship through marriage, right? So they get to double dip in that circumstance. If they're single, they got to choose, right? So if they're single, they got to choose. Okay, now why does that make that more expensive? Okay, good question. The reason why that scenario is more expensive is because typically, if we're relocating a married couple, and pay attention to this, because of the folks that don't use us for relocation, but then come to us later for legal problems because we own the law firm, we see this scam run on them quite a bit, right? Typically, what happens is if we relocate a couple, one member of that unit has a permit. Everyone else has a pass, which is infinitely cheaper, right? A pass means that the person who has the permit provides for dependents. That dependent can be a wife, the dependent can be children. The dependent could also be elderly parents, right? So they have dependents that depend on them for survival, right? And they have their permit, and then they attach the dependents to their permit. Again, infinitely cheaper, right? If I have to do, if I have to do two passes, right, then each pass costs about the same amount of money, including the issuance fee for the pass, right? The issuance fee for or for the permit, sorry. The issuance fee for a permit, for a 3-year permit, is 750,000 Kenyan shillings, right? That's like almost $7,000. That's just the issuance fee. It's not the application fee. That's not the legal work. That's not any of that. Just the issuance fee, which is a government payment. That payment goes directly to the government. That issuance fee is 750,000 Kenyan shillings. Okay, which is 6,000 and some odd dollars. We're just going to call it 7,000 for the sake of argument. And it depends on what's going on with the currency exchange. If you want to figure that out in dollars, but it's 250,000 Kenyan shillings per year issued, and a max permit is 3 years. So 750,000 right off the bat just for that permit. Now passes don't work that way, right? Passes attach for much, 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 much less. Okay, so for all 3 years, even way less. So if I got to do a investor permit for, let's say, I don't know, let's say dad needs an investor permit because he's going to work here, he's going to open a business here. Mom doesn't need an investor permit, but they're interested in the family as a whole getting dual citizenship. So now she needs an ordinary residency permit, he needs an investor permit. His investor permit is going to cost about $12,000, because remember, it's 7,000 just for the issuance, right? That's not the application. That's not the surety bond. You need 100,000 surety bond to make sure that if something goes wrong while you're here, you can get a ticket home. There's all these other government, costs, right? So it's gonna cost him like 12,000 to get that permit. And then instead of saying like, okay, cool, now we can just tack a pass on there for $2,000. Now mom needs a $10,000 ordinary residency permit, right? Because she's paying out the same thing per year in order for her to be on the path to dual citizenship and him to be on the path to business ownership at the same time, right? Welcome back, MM. Right? So that's why when you have to split it like that, it's more expensive. Now, does that matter if the person is actually making a solid strategic choice? No. Why? Because if it's a solid strategic choice, then the business makes money. Right? He's choosing that investor permit because he wants to operate a business, and he knows that business is already making money either elsewhere or from the country where they're operating. They've already engaged with local businesses and have maybe local partnerships going on. So they already know that they're going to be able to make money. We used to do a program. We suspended it since the last Trump presidency, unfortunately. But we used to do a program where we would set people up in something called SAM, the system of access management. And then what would end up happening in SAM is once you're signed up in SAM, you can sign up for government contracts. So you do not need to be a U.S. citizen. You do not need to be a U.S. company to sign up in SAM. So we would sign people up in SAM and they could do government contracts. Obviously, when Trump came in the office, he opened up Doge, and Doge crushed all the government contracts. So then it wasn't worth it, for us to proceed with that anymore. But People still get government contracts. It just wasn't worth this as a service provider for us to like charge people to set up everything and write the contract proposals for them and all that, because the ability to win a contract diminished so much because the amount of contracts that were in the ecosystem diminished so much that it to us it wasn't fair for us to keep offering that service. So we suspended it until the next presidency maybe. But anyway, those guys would get their government contracts and get government contracts for Kenya, right? There was a government contract. I'm trying to remember what the name of the contract is so you guys can Google it. But there was a government contract, a U.S. government contract for a U.S. government facility that was in, I think it was in Narok, but it was in Kenya. And in this facility, the roof had been broken and the elevator had been broken. So they needed someone to repair the roof and repair the elevator. And so in government facilities, sometimes there's rules and or laws that any work that needs to be done has to be put out for government contract for that work to be done, no matter where they are. So in that situation, do you need to know how to fix a roof? Do you need to know how to fix an elevator? No, you don't. You can subcontract the work out. You can subcontract the work to a local roofer, a local elevator repairer, and take 18, 20, 25% as a profit margin, and that's it, right? So a lot of folks would be set up that way, and so it wouldn't matter to them to go ahead and get the investor permit for one spouse, and then have the the ordinary residency permit for the other spouse, because that was like a $1.27 million contract with the U.S. government, right? So they're gonna bring in 1.27 million. They need to be able to do it and operate legally, so they got to spend that 12,000 to get their paperwork in order. But they're spending 12,000 to get 1.2 million. You're a fool if you don't see the beauty of that. So a lot of folks are like, okay, yeah, we'll just pay for both, because they have a plan. It's strategic and it's going to make them more money, right? If it's a pipe dream, and you're like, well, I'm going to go over there and open up a business, and in my head I'm going to make all this money, then you need to actually sit down with somebody and do something that's called a feasibility study. See, there are ways to take these pipe dreams and actualize them, right? A lot of times, I don't know, people are scared. They don't want somebody to tell them that they're wrong or that their idea is crazy. And then we're in this self-help generation where everybody thinks they can manifest everything, right? So they run into a situation where they're essentially beating a dead horse, as the saying goes, right? Where they have a really horrible idea. They won't listen to anybody about their horrible idea, and that's the end of it. And you shouldn't listen to lay people, but there are professionals that can flush out your idea, that can figure out, whether they're going to work or not and how much they're going to work, and really take you to the next level with it. And typically that's done with a feasibility study, right? So you want a feasibility study if it's going to be something brand new, to see if that's going to work. But if you can get some contracts going prior to arriving, then it makes sense to do both, if you're interested in taking advantage of the contract and you're interested in also still becoming a dual citizen. So there's that, right? So it definitely more than doubles the cost if you're going to do both. Just is what it is, right? So then, where are you going to live, or where are you going to do business out of, right? There are some online businesses that don't necessarily need a place to do business out of, so that's helpful for them. But the majority of businesses that make sense are businesses that are going to require a facility, right? Like manufacturing and production makes a lot of sense, right? It doesn't necessarily make sense if you got a Series 7 license to leave Wall Street and try to come to Nairobi and be a stockbroker, right? So which that might be an online business where you don't necessarily need an office, but doesn't make sense, right? Versus, if I want to produce the next line of shea butter, or I want to produce, a hair product, or I want to produce T-shirts, or I want to produce, art, or I want to produce leather goods or whatever, that makes sense. I can produce something at a lower labor rate and sell it at my home company or my home country, and I can not take advantage of people and still have a better labor rate, right? Like that makes sense. You don't want to run a sweatshop. At least our clients don't. We don't do business with people who want to run sweatshops. So you don't want to run a sweatshop, right? So you want to pay people a fair, livable wage, but you're just getting started, right? You're not Walmart, you're not some big, company. You're just getting started and you're probably funding it yourself, right? So you're lucky if you got a livable wage and then you got to take money out of that to pay somebody else a livable wage. Well, that doesn't always make sense in your home base, in your home country. But it could make sense if you go to a place where paying them a livable wage doesn't necessarily hurt you, right? We've had people open up shops out here where they paid people more than the mean, wage for the country, and it cost them like $400 a month to do that. Not even like $350 a month to do that, right? So we've actually had people who had menial jobs able to open countries and pay payroll here. So, and when I say menial jobs, I remember we had someone who was a Dunkin' Donuts assistant manager, right? So they were making very little money in the U.S., and yet they were still able to put 350, 400 away every month to pay salaries in Kenya. Or even every 2 weeks actually to pay salaries in Kenya, and the people in Kenya were being paid more than a general manager would make. So like the janitors were being paid more than like the equivalent general manager that they were. So like a KFC general manager here, they were paying their janitors more than KFC general managers get paid here, and McDonald's general managers get paid here. Well, there's no McDonald's here, but fast food general managers get paid and all that, right? So they were able to actually start real enterprise and real business and actually pay people decent wages and give them the things that they wish they would have had on that salary that they were operating with, from the United States. So it made sense to do that here. They couldn't have done that in Philadelphia. That wouldn't have worked, right? And because of the system that they came from, they weren't able to like go to the bank and get a bank loan to go start a corporation and leave Dunkin' Donuts, right? So sometimes it makes sense to jumpstart whatever you're doing by allowing the physical process to take place here. Also, the more of your supply chain that you own, the better off you are, period. Right? The further away you are from the client, the more money you make. That's just a general rule of business. The CEO never sees the client and makes way more than the person at the register. It's just a general rule of business. So the more of your supply chain you own, the better off you are. So a lot of folks will own their supply chain here. Also, the more of your supply chain you own, the more you know what your money is doing, right? One of our very, very, very first clients, she's actually passed on now. She used to do corporate awards, right? So Employee of the Month award, when you guys go to the theme park, Disney World, whatever, and everybody has the company shirt on, Employee Appreciation Day, blah, 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 blah. She did all of that stuff. And she lived in, oh man, it's been so long, Detroit, I believe. She lived in Detroit. Police unalived her granddaughter, right? The chief of police back then was like, this guy has to go. That was ridiculous. He should be charged and he needs to be fired, right? The police union had to defend him. He paid his union dues, right? So the union is now defending him because he's a member of the union. That's their job. That's what they got to do. She finds out that the company that she buys her t-shirts and like blank awards from is the number one donor to that police union. And mind you, to sell a t-shirt, you got to buy the shirt first, right? It's not an online business. So before she makes $1 in her, community-based business, she has to pay somebody outside of the community just for the stock. And then she finds out that the people who murdered her grandbaby are being supported by the money she's paying these people that she has to pay them before she can make $1 herself because she needs the stock. She was the first client who was like, I need my own manufacturing. It needs to be in Africa because she wanted her whole supply chain to just be aligned with what her people needed. She needed to stop paying money to people who did not have her people's best interests at heart, and it hit home to her, in a very serious way. So she was able to start producing her own T-shirts abroad and sending those T-shirts and sending, the plaques and all of that stuff and control that entire supply chain. So no longer was there a situation where, when something happened in her community, all of the black owned businesses were just black owned storefronts. They were all buying their supplies from other communities that didn't have the best interests of black folks at heart. And they were actually funding that. Right. So once they realized that, this became very, very attractive. Unfortunately, especially back then, the community needed that personal tragedy to even get mobilized. And a lot of folks, just believed the brainwashing, and would not mobilize to benefit, from Africa. We've actually done a bunch of like videos where we'll show who's in the room in Africa, and no one in the room looks like us but us, right? Meanwhile, people are arguing about whether Africans like us and all kinds of other nonsense, while the rest of the world are becoming millionaires and billionaires here. So it's crazy. But I digress. That is the purpose, for the most part, of opening up business here and making it make sense, is that you're gaining some sort of control over supply chain that you wouldn't be able to gain in whatever your base country is, which allows you to have an edge, same kind of edge that the Chinese have, right, and have had for years, is they had that very low labor rate. That is changing, right? We were just in China last month, and while we were there, the road workers were immigrants. They had like Filipinos and like Indians and stuff that were staying at the same hotel as us, and the company put them there, and they were building the road because China has become more like the U.S. They've lifted, it's like over 80% of the people in poverty into middle class now. Their home ownership is at 90%. 90% of the country owns a home, so they've done really great stuff to eliminate poverty and put people in a good position. And now they don't want to do menial labor anymore. They don't want to do the hard jobs anymore because they got money. They're good. They're comfortable, right? And so it's the same thing that the United States went through that's now happening there. So very soon, that price advantage and labor advantage that China used to have, they're not going to have anymore. So where's the new market going to be? It's going to be here, right? If you're positioned to take advantage of that, then you're going to profit from that. If not, then you're not. And not everybody has the same mindset as us, right? We only work with people that have a similar mindset to us, but not everybody has that mindset. We say no to people on a weekly basis who have what we would consider to be a colonizer mindset. So if you're not taking up space in this space, and you could be, it's a tragedy. Because if you're not taking up space, somebody else is going to come take up that space. Somebody else is not going to care about local people. They're not going to care about paying reasonable wages. They're not going to care about making sure that there's health care and those things in place. And, you're going to leave space for someone to come in and set up those sweatshops and really take advantage of the people. So if you have the ability to get involved, whether you use us or not is of no consequence. But if you have the ability to get involved and get into that space, then you should. Because the more people who have the right mentality that take up space, the less space there is for the people that have the wrong mentality. Right? So just, keep that in mind. All right. So now is where we have the diversions. Everything up until this point has been essentially the same, whether you're living here or whether you're just doing business here. From this point is where we diverge, right? If you're just doing business here and you're not living here, the costs of what it took to get out here have just ended, right? You have your taxes and all of that stuff, but that stuff you would pay anywhere, right? So the costs are done for you. If you're relocating, and you're relocating to live here, Now we get into daily costs, what a lot of people call costs of living, right? So now we get into your costs of living. That is going to depend on where you live, right? And so a lot of folks, their first foray into Kenya is in the capital, which is easily comparable to New York City, right? And so it's a more expensive city because it's a city like every other city on the planet. There's more crime, right? Cities are magnets, for crime. There's still not much crime, comparably speaking, but there's more crime, right? Um, there are also more services, right? There's more fun as well. A lot of our younger clients, they're going to go to the city because there's rooftop bars and there's nightlife and there's this and that and the other, and that's what they want, right? Okay, fine. For a lot of folks like me who spent all their life in big cities, they're good. They don't need the big cities anymore. We live at the beach, right? We love living at the beach. We live, within minutes of modern everything, right? So we're good. But a lot of people don't even know the beach lifestyle exists on their first foray into the country. So a lot of folks kind of start with Nairobi, right? So the pricing that they're starting with is already different. Okay, it's not necessarily that it's overpriced. It's just different. It's more expensive to live in New York City, than it is to live in Middletown, New York. That's it, right? So same thing here. Going to be more expensive to live in Nairobi than it is to live in, we live in Diani, for example, than it is to live in Diani. So that's going to adjust your cost of living, right? And then what do you need, right? What's your strategy? Some people are like, oh, I'm going to move there. I'm going to live in an apartment. Maybe because that's all they can afford, right? Sometimes when you hit affordability blocks, you got to step back and be like, can I afford this at all? If I'm hitting affordability blocks, in the strategy of this move, can I afford this at all? Right. So that's a valid question to ask. Sometimes the question is yes, right? Sometimes the question is yes. Oftentimes the question is no, and you need to take a step back and figure out, how you're going to do it, or maybe even choose a different location, right? So you want to see what that looks like. For us, being Diaspora Freedom Initiative, part of the freedom that we typically advocate for is freedom from mortgage, freedom from, bills and taxes. And so we typically don't advocate for people to be renting for the rest of their lives. But a lot of folks will even put themselves in a position, that's, what do they call it out here? They call it a service community, right? So it's kind of like an HOA, except they're not all up in your business like they are in the US, right? But what ends up happening is you buy a house and you're in this service community, and there might be things that they do, and it might be things that you like really need them to do, so maybe it works for you, who knows. But they might mow your lawn, they might provide water to you, they might pick up your trash every Thursday, whatever, right? They always provide security and a gate, right? So it's always like a gated community, and there's a security guard there. So that's essentially a guaranteed provide. There may be a clubhouse, maybe, right? But the more things that they provide, there might be a pool, there might be a tennis court, but the more things they provide, the more the service fee is. And the service fee is forever. And you're not in control of what the service fee costs. So a lot of folks, typically folks who try to do it on their own, will run into a situation where it seems like they found a great priced house, right? Great price. And that's because the business strategy is, let's just get them in, and then we can charge them forever for the service fee. So they may actually lose money on the house to get you in there, because if you don't pay your service fees, they can come, that's like the HOA, they come take the house from you and just sell it again, right? And they're making the service fees forever. That's why professionals are important. And that's why it's a really bad idea to have a price mindset and think that you're going to expand globally. You have to have a value-based mindset. You have to be willing to pay more for value, or you're going to run into problem after problem after problem, right? If all you're worried about is the lowest price, you're going to have a serious issue abroad anywhere, not just Kenya, abroad anywhere, right? So people who expand abroad have to have a value-based mindset. They have to be looking for the best value, the best quality, things that are going to last forever, essentially, and go from there. Like for us, when we do a relocation that involves a car, we do a new car that has a warranty. That when something breaks, you don't pay anything. You bring it in for the first 100,000 kilometers, right? Or the first 5 years, or 3 years, or whatever the warranty is on that particular model. Um, Now, sometimes people will piecemeal. Hey, Eddie Poa. So sometimes people will piecemeal and they won't take a package. Those people do get like used vehicles and stuff like that. And that comes from a lack of ability to commit, essentially, right? Anything that's in a package is supposed to be cheaper than what's not in a package, right? So you'll have situations sometimes where packaged up things are great value, but then folks will like dip their toe in instead of taking the plunge. So they'll be like, okay, we just want to convert our driver's license and get a car. That's all we want. We don't want the package. We only want that. Okay, fine. So now what's the budget for the car, right? Okay. Within this budget, you have these options or a used option, right? So people who are moving that way, what are they typically 9 times out of 10 going to choose? The used option, right? Well, the used option don't have a warranty. When something breaks on the used option, you're coming out of pocket. Could break the day after. You know what I mean? There's not necessarily a lemon law here. Things like that are now hitting. Whereas there's something called the economy of scale, right? So the more you do, the less it costs, right? So if we can go to the market and say, okay, we're building a house, we need all the materials for the house. We need to get a car as well. So it's going to be a new car. We can roll all those costs into one, right? And use one or two vendors to get everything. Now we can get a discount. And so now you get a brand new car at the same price that you bought the used car for, right? But it's, as you look, you see things like, oh, cars are expensive there. No. Cars are expensive for you because you're dealing piecemeal. You're buying things ad hoc. And so now your used car is the same price as a new car. So it seems expensive to you because you're a price buyer and you're buying everything based on price. You gotta be a value buyer when you're going abroad. You have to buy things based on value. And as an effect of that, you actually pay less. You'll actually pay a lower price because you're focused on value, right? So marketing is chock full of ways to trick price buyers, right? Sales that aren't really sales. We all see the exposés, it's Amazon Prime Day, and a month before, they doubled the price so that on the sale day on Black Friday they could half the price back to normal, right? Those are the games that marketers play. You can't play marketing games with value. Right. So when a salesman or a marketer runs into a value buyer, they just give them the best thing. You can't play a game with them because they're not swayed by what's the cheapest. So you got to get your mindset right if you're talking about going international. When you're local, it's different. There might be consumer protection laws. There might be like whatever that you're aware of locally, right? Or the opportunity cost might allow you to say, I'll just buy more and more. Like I remember, Jesus, when was this? 1998, maybe. There was a car called the Dodge Shadow. I could get a Dodge Shadow for $500, right? I don't even think the car exists anymore. I get a Dodge Shadow for $500. So the opportunity cost of buying a $500 Dodge Shadow, letting it break and buying another one made sense. Right? As long as I was making enough money off of having that transportation, it made sense for me to spend $500, less than $200 a quarter, if this car break down every 3 months, and just buy another one, right? And then have the useful parts from the last one if I needed to, do anything. It was okay, right? It was like paying, I don't know, it was like paying $99 a month, to own a car type of thing, right? So locally, you can do things like that, right? Yeah, Eddie, you remember the Dodge Shadow? Stop showing your age, Eddie. So at the time, things like that existed. You cannot do that internationally. You don't know what the international Dodge Shadow is, right? You don't know which vehicle has the most parts in the junkyard. You don't know which thing you can replace cheaply. You don't know which thing has the lowest insurance. You don't know these things, so you cannot approach international expansion with a price mindset. You have to cultivate a value mindset, right? The Plymouth Duster. Eddie, Eddie, stop letting everybody know how old we are, Eddie. so, so yeah, so that's the difference in the mindset that you need to bring into this thing. If you're going to be successful, if you're going to be successful in any kind of international expansion, once you become a local, you'll learn those things, right? Once you become a local again, you will learn like, oh, I can cut a corner over here. It'll be all right. It's worth it. That's called opportunity cost, right? What's the cost between what I'm doing now and all the other things I could be doing, right? Once you're a local and you actually know all the other things you could be doing, that's when you can make an opportunity cost analysis and go from there. But initially, get your professionals engaged. Your professionals carry liability, right? Your professionals carry liability. So they're not going to give you, something that's going to break down in 3 months. So your professionals are always going to give you the best thing that, is going to work for you. It's not going to break down. It's not going to cause you to come back after them and take them to court or something like that, because they carry that liability. So it's when in that first kind of expansion, always, always, always make sure that you have a professional team. Hey, One Drop, how's it going? Good to see you. Thank you for the heart, me. So yeah, always make sure that you have that professional team. We only do business in Kenya, right? Not all of the people who talk to us are doing business in Kenya, right? So it's not even just hire us because we're a professional team. Just go get a professional team for wherever it is you are doing business. Doesn't matter where it is. Doesn't matter if it's Europe. Doesn't matter if it's South America. Doesn't matter if it's Caribbean. Doesn't matter if it's Tonga. Doesn't matter if it's Hong Kong. Get a professional team. All right. Oh, thank you, One Drop. I see your restaurant in Ghana is doing well. Business looks amazing. Congratulations. I appreciate you. Car guide. I'm interested in what cars Kenya carries. So some of the cars that they carry are in a different name, right? So like, for example, one of our clients got what is it? A Lexus RX 450, but here it's called a Toyota Harrier. But if you look up Toyota Harrier USA in the United States, it's not a Toyota at all. It's a Lexus RX 450, right? So it just depends, on what it is you're looking for, because the name might be different here. Are they affordable? Yeah, they're affordable. Especially on the new car side of things, they're definitely affordable. We just did a 7-seater Kia Sportage for a family that was coming over. It's the top of the line one with the glass panoramic roof and all the stuff, right? So in the US, the retail, the manufacturer suggested retail, right, is 46,000, and in Kenya it's 38,000. So you know what I mean. You'll hear a lot of people say the cars are expensive. A lot of them are looking at used cars, they're trying to get a cheap car, and that is not a cheap prospect here because all of the used cars are imported, right? And sometimes they're imported used, right? So the first time they come to this country, they're already used, right? They're not imported new. So a lot of the import sellers are selling it new to Kenya type stuff. They're not lying and saying it's new, but there is a new to Kenya category where it's okay, this just got here from Tokyo, but it already has 50,000 kilometers on it, or whatever the case, maybe even 100,000. And so those prices are comparable to like certified pre-owned in the US type of thing. So it's real close to new, right? And then so that's where people are like, oh, but it's expensive. Not really. Now, if you're planning and you get a brand new car, it's actually typically cheaper. Now, if you go luxury, you go luxury because there might not be an import deal with that. There's a lot of Range Rovers over here. There's a lot of what else have I seen luxury wise? There's a lot of Porsches over here, believe it or not. Um, what else? What else? Ton of BMWs, but I'm not necessarily sure that they're seen as luxury. Same kind of BMW you would see as a taxi in France. You know what I mean? So those brands aren't always luxury internationally. Trying to think. I have seen a few Audis, but that's rare, So, it's just a matter of that. I'm concerned with the smoothness of the roads for cars I enjoy, but I'm also into 4x4s and SUV types. So yeah, we typically do all SUVs. Like any of our clients that are like getting a car through us, like of course if they're a car fanatic, they obviously have the option of just going out and buying cars like they would anywhere else. But the ones that get it in our package, we always give them an SUV so that they can go to rougher places. Like if they go on safari, there's no smooth road to the safari, right? So if you're going on the safari, you're going to get to a point where like it's safari road. Like now you're in the bush, you're in the wilderness, blah 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 blah. So like we do our top cars that people typically get is there's a Suzuki Jimny. Um, I used to call it a Jimmy. It's not JMM. It's not JIMMY. It's JIMNY. So it's a Jimny. There's a 5-door version and a 3-door version. There is a Renault, the French car. There's a Renault Duster and a Renault Kilias. Those are really nice. Jimny JIMNY, not G. Yeah. There's a new manufacturer from China called Cherry, and they're all that's coming in to us anyway are SUVs. I think they're, and that's another thing. Like sometimes the car company has a bunch of other cars. Like when we got here, I had a Kia Telluride in Philly. So I wanted a Kia Telluride when you got, you stick to what you know, right? They don't have Tellurides here. They have Kias, but Telluride is not one of the cars, that they have here. Could I have imported it? Yes, that gets expensive, right? So to import one car, and then it's like, all right, well, if I import this one car, what happens if I get the one car that has the bad transmission? You know what I mean? Typically, you just go to the dealership, you get a transmission, which is what would happen because I'd still have the warranty, but that transmission might need to be imported. So I might be waiting 3 months, to get my transmission fit, so it didn't make sense. I ended up buying a Renault. But so those are the types of cars that we typically package up for clients that are like buying a car with new construction and all of that stuff. So yeah, good car question though. Keep them coming if you got any more. So then it becomes a question of like, well, where are you going to live, right? And so you have the people who are like going to rent forever. Okay, yes, there are Jeeps out here. And then you have, for us, we like people to have home ownership because when you have home ownership, there's very few expenses that where we build typically. We'll build anywhere, including places that aren't great. If the person understands why we think they're not great and still wants to build there, that's fine. But typically we build in places that are amazing. So one of the rules for now, they are trying to change it, but for now, one of the rules is that if you have property that's designated as agricultural land, it's tax exempt, right? So you could build your house on land that's tax exempt. You could have a borehole, not have a water bill. You can have a biodigester, which we install routinely, so you don't have a sewer bill. We do a lot of off-grid houses and our smart house upgrades. If you get a smart house, those come with off-grid packages, right? So you don't have to upgrade to it. So you don't have an electric bill, right? So the only bill that most of our clients have outright is internet. They have an internet bill as far as a household bill, right? Internet and sometimes like cooking gas if they have like a gas stove. But if you're off grid solar and you got a converter, it might make sense to have an electric stove. Like most of those guys have an electric stove because why not? The electricity is free, right? So at that point, yeah, you built your house and it probably costs more to build your house than to buy a condo or something, but you're not paying anything anymore. You have unlimited water. You have your sewage is taken care of, and biodigesters do just that. They digest, the bio waste. So pumping things out of the biodigester is not like having a septic tank or anything like that. It takes care of itself for quite a long time. So you're essentially just good, right? What do off-grid property owners do against pest control? Do you mean like what, roaches and ants and like termites pest control, or you mean like bigger pests, like I'm from Pennsylvania, so we have like deer and raccoon and coyotes and stuff like that. Like, what do you mean by pest control? And so essentially that's typically where we lean and typically where most of our clients go. They build their own house, it's off grid, and they have everything kind of built in, and then they're not paying for the rest of their lives, right? So they have something, they own it, it's worth money, they immediately have equity, because typically they're either not doing a mortgage, because local mortgage rates seem high. America kind of has the best interest rates in the world. That's what's one of the things where they actually are best in the world. It's not just Kenya. If you go to Europe, you'll see the same thing. You go to the UK, you see the same thing. They actually have really, really good interest rates. So what we consider high interest rates are like base interest rates everywhere else, right? So even if someone does use financing to build their house, they typically use financing in their home country, right? So the house is free and clear here, and then what ends up happening, especially if they're like American, is if it falls apart and they're unable, to pay that financing, they don't live there anymore. They don't care about credit anymore. Credit doesn't follow you around the world. A lot of y'all think it does. Credit is not international. So they file bankruptcy. And that's the end of it. And they keep it moving. So once they have their stuff built out here, they have built-in equity. They can do things that are like similar to HELOCs, and tap that equity for cash if they want. Typically, once they've built the house, they've already doubled the price that they put into it. So once the house is built on the land, you typically you've already doubled the price, especially if it's in a community of other houses. So that's typically how that works. I'm not aware of any special pests we don't have in the States. Pest meaning insects. Gotcha. Okay. I like what you said about bankruptcy. Yeah, yeah, definitely. So insects, yeah, you just have like the Orchid Man. They don't call it that, but you got the Orchid Man come out and spray. It costs like $12. So you do that every 3 months, and you're good. A lot of our clients are so concerned with pests, which is interesting because I've never been. I mean, I don't know if it's the Philly area or what. Like, I don't know, but I've never been all that concerned with pests. Oh, give me a minute. TikTok is challenging me. It's the only one that does this. Facebook and YouTube never challenges me, but TikTok makes you do a puzzle to stay live. Anyway, so it's interesting how many people are so deep into like the pest control thing. But yeah, it costs next to nothing. It's like $10 every 3 months. Somebody comes out, they spray, they whatever, and keep the pests under control. But a lot of our American clients, they'll concrete their entire property in like an effort to get rid of like pests. You know what I mean? So they're like, no. There's grass over there. Things are living in the grass. So they'll concrete everything. So let me think. The last four clients have concreted their entire property. And to like get rid of the pest. And then when they see what like pest control costs, then they're like, oh, we shouldn't have done that. One of them actually paid to like come back and like get some green in there and get some palm trees and stuff like that. But yeah, it's interesting how many people are like super against pests to the point where they like overdo it. They do the most, and it's not necessarily helpful. So yeah, I hate spiders, and the queen hates caterpillars. Well, That's interesting. I have seen butterflies, but I haven't seen caterpillars. I guess you can't have one without the other, huh? So I guess there are caterpillars here. I just haven't seen them. Spiders, not so much. Yeah, at least not. You know, I see like little webs here and there, but I've never actually physically seen a spider out here where we are now. I did used to live in another beach place called oh yeah, not Mtwapa, Malindi, and there was like so I was in Afghanistan once upon a time, and they got these thing called camel spiders, and they're big. There was the equivalent of a camel spider in Malindi. I guess it's some kind of sand spider or whatever, and it runs with like its forearms up, and it's like the size of my hand. So that was crazy. Uh, you see black spiders in Kericho? Yeah. I bet. Yeah. So bananas have a relationship with spiders in Kisi, which is another banana place like Kericho. There are like these banana spiders or whatever, and banana spiders can get big too. But here, not many spiders here in Diani on this side of the beach. But spiders are everywhere. I once read a statistic, at least in the United States, that you're always 3 feet away from a spider. so, so I don't know, but yeah, you just got to have you just got to have the Orca man come in and do his thing, like every 3 months or whatever. Typically, we leave. Like so, if we're having it done, what we'll do is we'll typically leave and go from there. Also, what we'll do on the construction aspect is we'll build whoever's new construction, and then before we do the turnover, we'll bomb it, and then we'll let them know like you now need to be careful because a lot of people when you get your immigration done you'll get a one-time tax exemption for shipping, right? So you can ship your whole house in a container and like bring your house with you. So then we got to let them know like if you bring in your house you might think you got your pests under control, but you should bomb that house before you put it in the container. And so we'll typically turn over a house where it's been treated. The thing with that is when you treat the house, anything that's hiding comes out and ends up dying in plain sight. Because typically what the treatment does is it like dries them out. So they leave their nest or wherever they've like set up shop in search of water. But then whatever chemical they're using, when they find the water, it's actually the water that kills them. Like the effect of finding the water source is actually what does them in. So you'll see them in the bathroom, like drain, and like in the where they went looking for water and then expired. So that's how whatever they do, I don't know which chemicals they use or whatever they do to get rid of the pests, but that's how it works. So when you do it, a day or two later, all the pests will kind of show up and die, right? So you got to be aware of that so you don't walk in the place where you're like, oh, there's dead cockroaches over there. I guess that means we got cockroaches. No, it means you don't have cockroaches, right? So that's the thing to remember when you go ahead and you have the pest services done, is that a day or two after, all the pests are going to come out and die in plain view, basically. Yeah, I didn't get it the first time though, so I was like, "What? What are these bugs do?" So, but then when it was explained to me, it does make sense. So yeah, there's abundance out here though, and abundance makes animals act differently than we're used to. If you're like from the U.S., right? Like me, if you got a rat, you got a problem, right? Rats don't even come inside here. Rats don't go in the house because you don't have enough food in your house compared to what's available outside of the house, right? So, like behind me, there's a palm tree. Over here, there's a papaya tree. That tree is a mango tree. You know what I mean? Like, rats don't come in the house. They'll climb the tree and eat the mango. They don't care about your house here. So abundance makes creatures act very, very, very differently. We had a place where we were putting we put our trash outside, and there was like a porthole in the like the wall, right, the perimeter wall, and so the trash man could open from the other side and just take the trash and go, right. So it's trash that's sitting outside, obviously it attracts whatever. So the one time we're like, I'm going to put the trash, I'm opening the thing to open, whatever. And for whatever reason, auto accident or something, the trash guy didn't come. So like there was still trash in there. And it was wild because I opened it and there was like New York roaches, right? I got a thing with roaches myself. Right? It was like the big guys, right? They were in there and there's like trash, right? Like there's like baby diapers and da 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 da. They were in there eating apples because there's like so much just abundance. They act different. You know what I mean? Same thing with like flies. I got to record this because I say this and people are like, "What?" I've been sitting around like outside and there's like flies. Like you have your food. You don't want flies in your food is it's a problem, right? And so I'll have my food out and I'll have like steak over here and the maybe shrimp or the whatever and a salad. And I got to turn on my camera and record this one of these days for y'all. The flies are in the salad, eating the tomatoes and the lettuce. They're not touching the steak. There's just so much abundance out here that things act completely differently, right? And the way people interact with things change the way that animals act, right? So like in Philly, stray dogs and stuff like that get terrorized. Like kids are trying to tie firecrackers to their tail and like all kind of nonsense, right? So if you run across a stray dog in Philly, it's going to bite you. Like it's going to start growling, it's going to start barking, and if you approach it, it's more afraid of you than you probably are of it. But you approach it, you're going to have a problem with that dog. Here, a dog will walk by you so close it might brush up against your leg and don't care because people don't act the same way with animals here, where animals are on edge as soon as they see a human being. So it's very, very different when you're in a place that has abundance. Things act differently than when you're in a place of scarcity where all animals are starving. There's nothing for them to eat. When they come across you, they bite you, they attack you, whatever. It's not the same thing here, which was interesting, for me to observe as I, traveled from place to place. It's actually the same way in China. Like stray animals wouldn't, they wouldn't attack you. Now rats were different in China; they came in your house, but but yeah, stray animals really wouldn't attack you. Yeah, man. Yeah. No problem. No problem. Yeah, not a problem, Eddie. Yeah, we've been starting to do that. That's actually the social media manager, but I will tell her that you appreciate that. So you guys, if you're our old lives are posted on YouTube. They're unscripted. So some of them are 3 hours long, some of them are 45 minutes long. This depends on y'all's interaction. What you just said should be clipped for Americans here. I'll try to clip that one. It dawned on me just randomly. It's pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. There's a lot of really interesting things that happen. I've always been a world traveler, right? And so I lived in China for a couple years, but I was everywhere else I've lived. I was an expat. What's the difference between an expat and an immigrant? An expat is temporary, right? When you're an expat, you're going home. That's the difference. A lot of people will try to, racialize it or whatever. White folks call themselves expats and immigrants are brown. That's not true, right? If you're an immigrant, you're going there permanently. If you're an expat, you're going there temporarily. So everywhere else I've lived, the Philippines, I was an expat, right? China, I was an expat. Hong Kong, I was an expat, right? Um, you know, St. Lucia, Rodney Bay, St. Lucia, I was an expat, right? So all the places, the UK, expat, right? All of the places I lived, I was an expat. No matter how long I lived there, I was in China for 2 years, expat. I knew I was going home. I'm an immigrant in Kenya. This is home, right? I'll have my dual citizenship by next year, right? Early next year. I actually qualify for it now, and my paperwork is in, but it's too late in the year. They're going to shut down for December, so I won't get it till next year. So fine. This is home. The immigrant experience was different to the expat experience Psychologically, I felt the freest I had ever felt in China, and I had not been to Africa yet. So, I'm not saying China's better than Kenya. I don't. Kenya's the best for me personally, but China's definitely in number two. China was still amazing, and we just came back from China last month, and it's still just as amazing. In the South, the North don't necessarily like people that look like me as much, but I digress. Um, so I enjoyed Southern China. I enjoyed Canton immensely, right? And I stayed there for 2 years. I did not have the same psychological experience I had after being here for 6 months, knowing I wasn't going back. That changed the experience, right? There was a moment where I was sitting in a restaurant with my back to the door, something I would never do in Philadelphia. Had no idea where the emergency exits were, something I would never do in Philadelphia, just in case it was an active pew pew situation, right? So, in Philly, I knew where every exit was. I didn't enter a building unless I knew two ways to get out of it. I was probably carrying legally, you know what I mean? Pennsylvania is an open carry state, but in Philadelphia, you need a carry permit to even open carry, which I never open carried, but whatever, right? Whole different ball game, right? And there was this moment where I realized I didn't need that anymore, and I literally almost had a panic attack. Like my heart was coming through my chest. It was like I didn't know what to do. I didn't have a rooting and a base. And some of our clients, we do firearms permits here. They stop carrying within a month or two. Most of them, you know what I mean. But some of our clients, you can get a firearm permit in Kenya, and some of them do, just because they're so rooted to that. And that's fine. Our law firm will go ahead and process it for you. It's okay. You know what I mean? But eventually you get here and you're like, ooh, I really don't need to do that. And that moment is like scary because you don't realize how much of your identity is built into the BS, at least for Black Americans, built into the BS of being Black in America, and how much micromanaging you're doing in your own life to make sure that you're safe, just to make sure you survive a police interaction, to make sure you survive being in a movie theater, because some random person might come in there and shoot the place up. Even in school, your kids, might get, unalived while they're trying to work on their education. These things do not happen here. So I think in the last 40 years, there was one mall shooting, and like an international terrorist organization took credit for it. Like not some random guy from Kentucky, you know what I mean? And it hasn't happened since. So it's different, you know what I mean? And when that difference hits you, it's very weird. It's very hard to explain. You had to have gone through it, but it never hit as an expat because I always knew I was going home. Expats know they're going home. The psychology of being an expat is different. For immigrants, that it's eventually going to hit you, and it's going to hit you like an epiphany. That's the best word I can use for it. Working on my residual income to begin pursuing immigration in Kenya. Reach out to us. There are ways to. Income is put into buckets, right? So if you ever done your taxes or you ever done whatever, income is put into buckets, right? And so is something a business expense? Is it not a business expense? Is it a home-based business? Is it not a home-based business? All of that stuff is really governed by two things: whether it's reasonable, so reasonability, okay, and who decides what's reasonable, right? So there's a bunch of case law around reasonability, right? And then the other thing is your point of view, right? So it's your objectivity and your reasonability is going to decide what bucket, what income goes into, right? So you may think that you need more residual income, but you might not. You might just not be putting it in the right bucket because you don't know what you don't know. So reach out to us, if your income is sufficient, but you think you just don't have enough residual income, we might be able to handle that. security measures went into place just after that one attack to that mall. Yeah. Yep. Um, yeah, and I mean, yeah, there is security everywhere. They responded. We don't typically respond. We're just like, oh yeah, there was a mass, blah 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 blah, at such and such a mall today, 80 people, and then we move on. Like we don't do anything about it. But they responded to it. So like every mall has security. You walk through security before you go into a mall now. Like, yeah, it's they to me that's common sense. I'm not gonna argue it because whatever, but it makes sense to respond when something happens. How did you pick Kenya? Okay, that's a great question because Kenya's not right for everybody. Thanks for asking that question. You choose the country by figuring out what your goals are and working in reverse. You want a country that incentivizes your goals, not just allows them, right? So people who move to Tanzania are learning about that right now, right? So the things that they were thinking about doing were allowed in Tanzania, but it was not incentivized. So what's happened? Tanzania has just passed a law where foreigners cannot participate in 15 different categories of business, and one of those categories is SMEs. SME stands for small and medium enterprise. So small businesses, you can't participate in. So that's like saying, oh, we only want Hilton, we don't want Airbnbs. Because small and medium enterprise can't be owned by foreigners now, right? So those folks are now finding out the hard way that vibes are not the way to pick a country to relocate to. And that it's not enough for it to be allowed what you want to do. It needs to be incentivized because things are reduced in phases, right? So if it's incentivized, the first phase is to lose the incentive, right? Not to eliminate the thing. But if they just allow it, the first phase might be to eliminate the thing, which is exactly what happened in Tanzania, right? So you want to make sure that whatever your goals are incentivized in the place that you're going, and that's how you figure out which place is best for you. You think you have no residual, but residual is just a category that can be created multiple ways, right? So there's a bunch of folks working a job, and that job income, that W-2 corporate, or not even corporate, but that's a W-2 job income, can be residual income if it's categorized properly, and it's not just as easy as changing a name, right? But you can put systems in place that turn that into residual income legally and definitively. Remember I was talking earlier and we were saying that we had the guy who was the Dunkin' Donuts assistant manager. You don't think he had residual income, do you? Yeah, give us a call. Oh, well, that's a deeper question now. How do you figure out your goals? So, oh man, that's such a mindset question. You really should have a sense of what your goal is. Sometimes you have to niche down your goal, right? Oh, you missed that. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes you have to niche down your goal, right? Like it might, like your initial reaction might be like, "Oh, my goal is to be a business owner." Okay, well, come on. We got to figure out what kind of, or my goal is to be rich. That's not a goal. That's a dream, right? So we got to go from dream to goal. That I get it, but if you legitimately are like, well, I don't have any goals, I don't have any dreams, that's a mindset issue. That's a mindset issue. I can't just give you an answer. We got to figure out the root of that. Where does that come from? Why don't you have any dreams and any goals? And so that might take more work than a question on a live, right? But you should know what you want out of life. You should at least have a dream, And from that dream, you can niche down into a goal, right? So you can niche down into based on what, how do you do that? All right. So if you have the dream, then you want to figure out what are your morals, right? What are your ethics? What do you think is right and what do you think is wrong? And how do you apply the things that you think are right to your dream to get what you want in an ethical way for you, right? Whatever is ethical for you. And that's how you'll start niching down, right? So you might be like, all right, well, I want to own a business and I want to own a business so that I'm time independent. Most businesses do not make you time independent, but a lot of people are like, oh, I want to, I want to control my time, so I want to own a business. Most businesses do not do that for you. There are a couple that do, right? But then you got to look at your ethics and figure out, which things, you ethically like and which things you don't ethically like. The biggest, business that'll kind of give you some time independence, right? And time independence and capital are inversely related. So the businesses that give you the best time independence require the most capital. The ones that take up the most of your time require the least capital. So, landlording is one of those, things that can give you time back. But the only way you get time back by landlording is by going capital intensive. If you're doing everything in the property, you will not get your time back, right? So that means you have to hire a property manager. That means you have to, hire a maintenance team. That means you have to hire everybody, right? And so if you're hiring all those people, that makes it capital intensive, right? But it could give you your time back. Now, do you think it's ethical to be a landlord, right? I know there's a lot of people who like, I understand it's unethical to be a slumlord, but whatever. There's a lot of people that have whatever thing going on in their head where they think landlording isn't. If you're one of those people, then that just cross that off your list, right? Ain't nobody finna to convince you that you're wrong or that you're right. So you got to move within your own ethics, or you'll never be able to take it to the highest level. Because if you feel like you're doing something wrong, everyone you talk to will sense that, and then nobody will trust you. And if no one trusts you, then no one will do business with you, right? So you got to make sure that you're doing what you truly believe to be right, and people will sense that. I've been in business meetings and stuff where people just know, like, all right, this dude, he believes in this, you know what I mean, and he's about it for real. They can sense it, right? So you can't fake whether or not you think you're innocent or guilty, right? Is what it essentially boils down to. People will sense from you, like, oh, this person, are they trying to scam me? Like, what's going on? Why do they feel like that? What's going on with these vibes, right? And so that's how you do it. You figure out what it is that you want, figure out what your ethics are and your morals are, and then work backwards from that until you get to a place where you're like, okay, this fits my ethics, this fits my morals, it leads me to the outcome I want, this is what I want to do, right? And it keeps going from there, right? Like once you have that down, if you start building like a family, you'll be able to actually build in strategy for like what you want your family to be about, and so on and so forth. So everything becomes strategy eventually. I'm planning on moving there within 2 years. Very nice. Very nice. Just execute that plan. Just discipline. Discipline and execute. You'll be good. A lot of our clients that have those types of plans are able to create residual income before they get here, especially now with the bond market being absurdly good out here. There's a corporate bond that I typically don't talk about those. I typically talk about government treasury bonds. There's a corporate bond that literally just opened. It's open to foreigners. It's tax exempt. I want to say it guarantees 10.4%, and it's a Safaricom corporate bond. If you know anything about how Kenya operates, there is a wireless payment system that predates like Apple Pay and that type of stuff. It's better than Samsung Pay and Apple Pay and Google Pay, in my opinion, because it can't be hacked digitally. It's analog technology. So it's locked into your SIM card, essentially. And if you lose your SIM card, they can replace it immediately for less than $10, like $5 replacement fee type of thing, right? So the company that's issuing the bonds is the company that owns that. So I don't think they're going anywhere, right? It's a 5-year bond, tax exempt, and it essentially matches the S&P 500, right? It's giving 10.4%, return on investment, and then at the end of the 5 years, it's a bond, so you get all your capital back. So things like that, bonds out here typically pay out twice a year. So if you get 6 bonds and those 6 bonds are paying out, whatever it is you need to be okay, right? Typically, what we do with our clients is they get about 1 million in local currency, which is about 10,000. Let's just say $10,000. Right now, I think it's closer to 8, but let's just make things easy. So each million is about $10,000. So they start with like 70,000. We get 6 bonds, and then you pay the service fees and all that, right? So 6 bonds. Those 6 bonds pay out every 6 months from the government. If we can get infrastructure bonds are tax exempt, right? So if we can get infrastructure bonds, they're tax exempt. And so every month you're getting 100,000, maybe 120,000. It depends on what the interest rate is on the bond, right? We had an infrastructure bond that the interest rate was 18.46%. It's like double the S&P 500, right? So there were actually institutional firms from the U.S. that were pulling their stock market money and putting it into a government bond in Kenya, because they were, even with the interest that they would have to pay on the capital gains in the United States, they were still making money because it was interest free here, or tax free here. I'm sorry, and tax free here, right? And the interest rate was so high, there were people taking loans because they could get a what was it? What was the name of the loan? They had what's the name of that credit union? Navy Federal. They had Navy Federal Credit Union. They could get like a 4 or 5% loan. They were taking the 5% loan, buying the 18.46% government bond, and if it was 5%, then they're still making like whatever 13%, 13.46% on the bond, right? So they were paying off the loan with the bond payments and still making money. So the bond market here is nuts. So a lot of folks, what they'll do is they'll get set up, they'll pay and get their immigration done, which will allow us to get them a KRA pin and a central bank account and all of that stuff. And then over the years that they're waiting, they'll actually start buying those bonds. But in the years that they're waiting, like how he was saying he's moving here in 2 years, when he gets here, he already has 2 years towards dual citizenship, right? So now he doesn't have to wait as long. So there's a lot. We even have folks that that they have 7 years to retirement, and they already have their ordinary residency permit, what people call a retirement permit. And by the time they retire, they'll qualify for dual citizenship. So if you're coming in a certain amount of time, the planning that can be done can make it really, really simple for you to just step in. They'll come in here, no restrictions. They'll come in here 6 months later, they'll have a Kenyan passport, they'll be a Kenyan citizen, they'll have absolutely no restrictions at that point. They'll be good to go. So if you have that kind of planning time, and some people will set a plan and they have no discipline and they'll just not hit it, right? But if you're one of those people that like, no, I just plan and I hit my plans, and I do what I need to do, and I save what I need to save, and I invest what I need to invest. But I'm just going to do it in 5 years. I'm just going to do it in 2 years. Those people do really well, because by the time they're out here, if they're using a professional firm like ours, they're really set up well. And so yeah, don't be afraid if it's a few years out or something and you need to make a plan. You can do something that puts you in a really good position. Are those bonds that pay out every 6 months? Yeah, they pay out every 6 months, but the 6 months are different. It depends on when you buy the bond, right? So what you do is you ladder them. And so you make sure you get a payment every month. Like every month is one of the 6 months of the 6 bonds you have. Because, if it's 6 bonds and they pay half, every 6 months, every year they give you the full ROI, but they give you half a payment every 6 months. So if you have 6 of them, you get 12 payments, and there's 12 months in the year. So you ladder the bonds so that every month the government's giving you a payment. And if you get, infrastructure bonds, which are not available every month, but when they do open and infrastructure bonds are available, that payment is tax free, right? But even the bond payments that do have taxes, it's not like they give it to you and then you got to go do a tax filing. They hold the taxes. They withhold whatever the taxes are, and the taxes are only on the ROI. It's not on the original amount of money that you paid in. And typically those bonds have what's called a coupon discount. So whatever the discount is, kind of helps offset the taxes as well. So like if you bought, I don't know, 1 million in a fixed deposit, bond, right? An FXD bond. There might be a discount of, I don't know, 5% or something like that, right? So when you pay, you wouldn't actually pay 1 million. You would actually pay the whatever 950,000 because you have whatever discount you have, right? I didn't do math there, so but whatever the discount is, that's what you would actually pay. But your actual like certificate, which is electronic, but your actual certificate would say you have 1 million, even though you didn't actually pay 1 million, right? So that helps offset the tax as well because you paid with the discount. If it's the initial auction, sometimes they'll reopen auctions. So like that 18.46% might come back around, but you won't get the full 20 years. That was a 20-year bond, and 18.46% for 20 years is amazing. But that was a 20-year bond. So it might reopen and there's 15 years left. And it might reopen again and there's 10 years left, but the interest rate doesn't change, right? So, you just keep your eyes open. Like right now, there's a bond just open, but they're fixed bonds, which have 14% capital gains tax. So it's not a tax exempt, bond like an infrastructure bond is. But who cares? I mean, typically you pay taxes anyway. The tax exempt stuff is a bonus. Like right now, that Safaricom one, it's a little lower than the government bonds, but the government bonds that are available right now, they're like 12%. I saw an 11 something in the last auction, and Safaricom is 10.4, but it's 10.4 tax free, tax exempt. So those are the things you got to juggle around. You got to look at what your plan is, how much money you need to get by. Because what'll end up happening is the bonds will end up taking care of daily expenses, right? So once you know, like, okay, mind you, the average Kenyan makes like maybe 30,000 shillings a month, right? So if you ladder bonds and you're making 1 million shillings a month, you can get by, right? Or I'm sorry, not 1 million, 100,000. I'm sorry. If you use 1 million to get 100,000, a month happening for you, you're good, right? So even right now, where the bond interest rates are a little bit lower, people who are using 1 million, right? Exactly, they're still getting like 70,000 a month, right? So double the average person's pay, to work with, and they already own their home. They don't have any bills because their home is off grid and all of that. So that 70,000 is fine for them. But that ain't all they got. That's just their base, so that they're like okay, so they feel secure, right? So there's a free 70,000 a month guaranteed by the government that's hitting every month. That okay, we're good. They might still have some online business that they're doing, outside of Kenya, right? That they're doing like remote work or something like that. They might still have a business in Kenya that they're doing if they have an investor permit, and they're doing something like that. So a lot of people who want that safety net in place and have the capital, to do it, which a lot of folks do. We have a lot of folks that, like, when BlackRock and Vanguard and all those guys were buying single family homes and doing, double asking price, triple asking price to buy these homes, they had saved up money for a down payment and couldn't buy a home because, these VCs and stuff and these mutual funds were buying up single family homes. They weren't buying apartment complexes, right? And so we have a lot of folks that had that money put together and can actually use that to essentially retire, right? Essentially, they're living off the dividends for the next 20 years because, they bought the 6 bonds that were well placed. And you get, if you want to do it all in 1 year, you get two bites at the apple, right? So if you buy a bond in February, right, typically that bond would then pay out in January and June, right? So the month that you buy the bond, typically the payout is the previous month, and then 6 months from that or whatever. And so what ends up happening is you get two bites at the apple, right? So you got February and July to make those same two kind of payments pop up. Crown Fit, is that 70,000 Kenya shillings? Yeah. Because you're buying in Kenya shillings and you're living in Kenya, right? So what you don't want to do. This is a trap anywhere in the world, right? And not just Kenya. This is a trap anywhere in the world. Pay attention, because I've lived in quite a few countries, right? The trap anywhere in the world is to think about money in your old currency, no matter what it is. So if I did it in the Philippines, I did it in China. If you're in a country and every time you look at a price, you go into your head and you're like, oh, that's only $5. You will run out of money. Plain and simple, right? There are certain things that are typically the same amount everywhere. Electronics, estates, right? If you're going to buy an estate, the range is similar everywhere, right? Property is definitely cheaper here, but the range is similar, right? But you don't want to be, for example, I'm if I go to the DoubleTree in Philly on Columbus Boulevard, I tip the waiter, $10. That's what I tip. Right, so I'm gonna tip $10 here. Right, that's a crazy tip here. Right, so like a tip here would be like 250 shillings, which is less than $2. Right, so if you keep thinking about, oh, well, this is only $5. Well, this is only $10. Yeah, but you're not operating in that world anymore. You're not operating in $10 anymore. You're not operating in $5 anymore, right? So you have to understand. You have to be thinking in local currency, right? 70,000 Kenyan shillings after your house is built. You own a car and you're off grid. You don't have an electric bill. You don't have a water bill. You don't have only bill you have is internet, cell phone. You know what I mean? And that's it. 70,000 shillings spends like probably $15,000 to $20,000, right? Again, as long as you're not touching those things where the pricing is typically the same. Electronics, vehicles, imported things are typically the same price, right? But your standard daily stuff, toilet paper, soap, food, gas at the gas pump, all of that, 70,000 shillings is going to spend like $15,000 to $20,000 in the U.S., right? I go to the grocery store, and what would have cost me $300 at the grocery store in Philadelphia, right, cost me, like, if I'm doing it in U.S. dollars, it cost me like $20, right? So 20 to 300, right? And I'm getting, more stuff for the 20 than I would have got for the 300. So it's one of those things where when you add it up, you're like, okay, the things I'm doing here, right? If I'm going out to eat 4 meals a day, 7 days a week, right? What's that going to cost you in the United States? Right? It's going to cost you like 10 grand easy, right? Especially if it's more than one person, right? Because that might be $300 a meal. Well, that's $1,200 a day, 30 days. $1,200 a day in 10 days is how much money? Right? So it's a different thing, right? So yeah, it might be 70,000 shillings, and then if you sit there and try to, well, it was 70,000 shillings in U.S. dollar, you're fooling yourself. What you got to figure out is what the cost of living is in the place where you are, right? So you'll have 70,000 Kenyan shillings, but then you'll realize 70,000 Kenyan shillings pays for my maid. I have a farm, so there's security there at the farm. There's staff at the farm. I have a governess for my son. The governess is in charge of the entire house. She's in charge of the maids. She's in charge of all of that, right? So I have a governess, my fuel for my car and all of that. I go out to eat half of my meals because the governess does, there's a cook and all of that stuff. So we do eat at home as well. I have three dogs, two Rottweilers, and a black lab, right? So they all get the best German dog food, right? I'm thinking about getting a cane corso, right? So all of that is covered inside of that 70,000, right? Everybody's salary for the month, all of that is covered, right? And so it just depends on what you need, as your monthly expenses, for the month. But you'll adjust what you buy in bonds to cover whatever it is. If you need 100,000, you can do that. You might need to do 1.5 or 2 million as your bond minimum set, right? But 2 million shillings is like what? Somewhere in the neighborhood of $14,000, right? So if you were saving up a down payment for a home and you live in New York City, what does that mean that you saved up? That means that you saved up like 90,000, $110,000 for that New York City home down payment, right? So can you afford to come in and have your bond payments be $100,000 a month from the government? Yes, you can. Yeah. You can relocate and make sure that you have guaranteed interest rates from government bonds, and that half of your ROI is 100,000, and you could be making 1.2 million Kenyan shillings a year on those six bonds. So but that would be your base, right? Bonds are safe investments. So that will be your base. After you get your base, now you can make risky investments because you always have your base, right? And then that's how you get money to start working for you. How much are bonds here in Kenya? Whatever you want to pay. Now, the minimum is 50,000 shillings. 50,000 shillings is like $380. Right? So the minimum that you buy into, Antoine, was going to be 50,000 shillings, right? But that's not gonna do what we're talking about doing, right? So what the minimum that we typically recommend, like in our packages, where for people who want to do this, you want to come in at a minimum of $70,000 so that each bond you buy is a million. There's another reason for the million thing, because bonds have, kind of like crypto, bonds will have sometimes halfway through the bond. So what'll end up happening is, if you have a million shillings in a bond, and let's say it's a 20-year bond, right? So for the next 20 years, you're good, right? You got this money coming in for the next 20 years, you're solid, right? Well, at 10 years, the government will give you half your money back. You still got the same ROI, but now you got half the money, and the bond will have, right? Halfway through the situation. So what'll end up happening is, you might be getting 100,000 a month for the first 10 years. Now it's 50,000 for the last 10 years. But if you ain't did nothing in that 10 years, something's wrong with you. Right? So, understanding that's, how that would now. Okay, so why do you need a million? Okay, so what? So I could have half a million? No. You need a million because if the bond halves and the face value of your bond is less than a million, they won't do half. They'll give you all your money back. So if you do 750,000, they're not going to give you half of it. They'll give you everything you put in back. You got to be above a million to get the half, right? So your investment might end in 10 years if you don't put in, or end in 5 years, or whatever the halfway point is, if you don't put in a million. How do I get this set up for myself? It depends on where you are. If you're not in Kenya, good luck. I wouldn't even give you steps, because you'll mess it up, and then you come back and tell me that I'm the one who messed it up for you. If you're in Kenya, go to the bank, or go to an investment broker, or whatever. But for our clients, we have our own in-house investment brokers that are in the law firm, and we whatever. But if you want to do it yourself and you're not in Kenya, good luck. Yeah, man, definitely, for sure, Eddie. But yeah, it's whatever denomination you want, Antoine. Whatever denomination you want. Most folks do want it in their plan, Eddie, for sure. Yeah, yeah, you're not alone on that. Most folks do want it. Not everybody can afford it, even though it's actually cheap. Like if you look at what it would cost to do this in America, typically this is what a 401k does, right? So then if you think about your 401k, you got to put money in your 401k for, I don't know, 40 years before it matures. And then if you take it out early, you know what I mean? Then you get a penalty. So even though you've worked there 40 years, if you're not at the age, you still can't touch it for a few more years and all that. So it's typically the same thing. So what a lot of people realize is they can move here and essentially retire immediately. Like they can move here, dump what they were saving for whatever into a program like this, and immediately have passive income. They're getting checks in the mail for doing absolutely nothing, and they're effectively retired the instant they get here. And they might be 35. We have a few people that are younger than 40, and they've been able to come in and do the bond laddering, and they're good. You know what I mean? So they're effectively retired instantaneously. Can you do it for me as a client? Yeah, I mean, that's what we do. So we definitely can. We typically don't do it as a one-off. We typically do it as, like if you're immigrating here and then you need that, support. We typically do it as part of that. But yeah, we can do it. Exactly. Exactly. Yep. Yep. Is that my minimum package? No, it's not that it's my minimum package, right? So I guess Eddie's checked the exchange rate, which thank you for that, Eddie. But a million Kenyan shillings right now is like 7,500 US dollars, right? So he's asking is that the minimum package? Not really, because typically what ends up happening is people come in on like an immigration package typically, right? Now the ones who don't come in on an immigration package will come in on like an offshore family trust package. So there are folks that do this for their offshore family trust as well, where the offshore family trust is making this money every month, and then they have it set up in their family trust that when that money comes in, the trust goes out and invests in other things to like keep it going, right? So it's just typically something that people add on to our packages. But in order to get just a regular what's it called ordinary residency permit, it costs $10,000 just to do that. There's like $7,000 of that is the issuance fee from the government, not the application fee, not the surety bond fee, not the legal fee. Like just the issuance fee for 3 years is 750,000 shillings, right? Which is like 6,000 whatever, right? Might as well call it 7,000. So it takes about 10 grand to do an investor package, or not an investor package, an immigrant package, and then some people will be like, okay, well, I'm an immigrant, but then how am I going to get my money? So then they add on a package like this. Can a non-resident qualify to buy government bonds? Kind of. Um, if someone wants to be a non-resident and still purchase bonds, typically you're going to have to go through a brokerage. So you're going to pay broker's fees, number one. And then that brokerage is going to have to set you up. Because here's the thing. Like I said, it's great when we get an infrastructure bond because infrastructure bonds are tax exempt. Okay, fine. So that's great. We want the tax exempt money. Yay. But most of the bonds are not infrastructure bonds, right? So most of the bonds have capital gains tax. How do they charge you the tax? Can't use your social security number, right? This is not America, right? Can't use your TIN number in the UK. It's not the UK. So that means that you need a Kenyan social security number, what's called a KRA pin. How do you qualify for that? You can't just ask for one. Same in the US. You can't just ask for a social security number, right? You got to qualify for it. So the problem with being like, oh, well, let me just do this from abroad is that you don't have the tax ID certifications to engage. So you would have to then sign up with a brokerage, and the brokerage would be investing on your behalf and then charging you fees and then pumping money out into a brokerage account for you, when that money comes through. So you're not going to do as well, right? Where you would have maybe gotten that 70K a month going into a Kenyan bank account. Now with the brokerage fees, 50, maybe 40 a month, right? And like, what is it doing if you're not a resident, right? So like I said, we do what's called a generational wealth family trust, right? So people will set up a family trust here, and they do it here because there's benefits and tax exemptions and blah 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 blah. But they'll set up a trust here that you don't need a whole lot of money to set up, and that trust will make more and more money as the years go on. And so they'll make like their grandkids or their kids the beneficiaries of that trust, right? Because right, and this is one of the strategies that they utilize for that trust. So in that regard, the trust has tax ID numbers because the trust is a local organization. It's an offshore trust to you, but it's a local organization to Kenya. So it's a Kenyan, like the whole Citizens United thing in America, where corporations are people. That's fairly common across the world. So that corporate trust that you set up is a person in Kenya, and it has its own tax ID number and all that, so it can do the thing, and then it can have its own bank account, and so now you're building generational wealth. So then it makes sense. But if you're not going to be here or have a business here, and again, a business is a person in its own right, holds its own bank accounts and all of that, so your business could do it, and that would also make sense if your initial investment in your business was to set this up. But if you're not relocating here, you're not going to be a resident here, then it's kind of like, well, what exactly are you doing, right? So I don't know. It depends on your strategy. We'd have to see what your strategy is, and why you think it might make sense to do it as a non-resident. Million minimum amount needed for having to stay in town. Right. So the minimum amount is going to be based on like what you got going on. We have clients that have farms, right? Like they did a farm homestead out here, and they got a farm, and they live a very simple life, by choice. They could do whatever they want, but they live a very simple life. They get by on like 20,000 a month. Well, like they're not like stressing themselves out, you know what I mean? Like, but they have all their own food. They make their own clothes because they have sheep and goats and wool, and they know how to process it. They have, they skumawiki, which is spinach, corn are two like really, really basic crops here, but they do mangoes, they do papayas. We got people who do vanilla bean, dragon fruit. They do their own coffee. Like they have it all. They got chickens, all of that, right? So they don't go have a grocery bill. They don't have any of that. We even got a guy who has some kind of chemical kit that you can purchase apparently on Amazon. And you buy this kit and you get wood chips, and you put the wood chips in this solution, and the wood is broken down into diesel fuel. So he has diesel like trucks for the farm, and he has a Mercedes-Benz diesel car, and he hasn't purchased fuel in the last 13 years. He makes all his own diesel from wood chips at the house, right? So you get some people who are off grid, who are really off grid. They don't need nothing, right? And they live really well for a very small amount of money. So it just depends on what you need. But it's definitely a good base strategy. It's not the only strategy. I wouldn't make it the end all be all. I would definitely go after more aggressive forms of passive income and stuff like that. But it gives you the ad hoc freedom. Most people who win in business and investing have ad hoc opportunity freedom, right? So when an opportunity presents itself, they have the ability to throw ad hoc money at that opportunity and take advantage of it immediately, right? Those are the folks who win, right? So getting your capital together and having the ability to invest ad hoc, right? Which means when the opportunity presents itself, you can jump on it, right? Is the way to win. Somebody had thrown up a Goa somewhere, and that was an ad hoc opportunity. When Trump started his tariff war, folks that had ad hoc resources were able to immediately start manufacturing businesses here in Kenya, utilized the AGOA law to make them tariff exempt, and for the first time ever, were able to produce things like T-shirts cheaper than the Chinese because they had 140% tariff on them. That was an ad hoc opportunity. The people who couldn't make a move because they didn't have funds available, they missed that opportunity, right? Yeah, the AGOA law. Yep. Now the AGOA law is gone. However, it's said that it has bipartisan support to be renewed, and so we'll see what happens with that. Because if AGOA gets renewed, then that opportunity remains, but it's still going to be the people who can throw some money at it that are going to benefit versus folks that don't have money set aside, and then they try to, when they see the opportunity, they try to get the money together. It's typically too long, too slow, and by the time you get the money, it's gone. So work on getting, you know, um, your emergency fund first. You want all your base stuff first. So work on getting your emergency fund. Once you get your emergency fund, then like ladder and do like your laddering stuff and get that base amount of passive income coming in where you feel good if everything else is okay. And then after you're done with that, then you can start making risky investments. On top of the 100K investor permit that I'll be on, I can throw a couple million shillings into bonds, or is that million? No, not USD. No, 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 no. Nah, you're good, Antoine. No, and the 100K investor permit, you don't lose that, right? So, and for the people going through me, you guys know that. But in case you're doing something else with someone else, and they're like, "Oh, to get an investor permit, it costs $100,000." No, you're not giving up $100,000. You just put $100,000 in a bank account so that the Kenyan government takes you seriously, right? So when you say you're a business owner, the Kenyan government is not looking for dreamers that got a business idea talking about their business owner because they got an LLC. The Kenyan government is looking for people that got the money to run businesses, right? So when you try to get an investor permit, which is a permit to run a business, the way you prove that you have, the funds to run that business is you put $100,000 in a Kenyan bank account, but it's your bank account, right? So after they issue the permit, you just pull the money right out of that. So a lot of folks that want the ability to work in Kenya do exactly what Anton was just talking about. They put the 100,000 in, and then they give us power of attorney to take the 70 out that we were talking about. And then we take that 70 out, and we have a professional, right, in the law firm, or a professional, finance, a certified, professional, pick which bonds to get you over the next year, and then when that's all done, all those bonds are paying out into your bank account. You're not paying that professional monthly or yearly or anything like that. The payment is part of the 70,000, that they get, and then we get the six best bonds that we can for you, and then you get those payments every month for the 20 years. We typically try to do 20-year bonds, so you get those payments, for the next 20 years, and you're good to go, right? So typically, people who can come in and get an investor permit can utilize the money that they already sent here for the investor permit to do multiple things. Sometimes they utilize it to buy land and build a house, and they might have to top up some extra money on that in order to do that. Sometimes they utilize it to get these bonds going, which they wouldn't have to top up any extra money if that's what they were doing, right? Or if they wanted their offshore trusts, their generational wealth trust fund set up, and the bonds, they wouldn't need to add extra money to do that, right? So if they're coming in with the 100K for the investor's permit, there's a ton of stuff that they can do with that money, because as soon as the permit comes out, the money is available to them again, right? So don't let anyone scam you into thinking you pay 100,000 for an investor's permit, because we have seen that, and that's so sad. That's a lot of money to lose, right? Okay, perfect. That's exactly what I was thinking. Yep. That's exactly how it works. Don't need a KRA pin to open a Kenyan bank. You do. That's why I said it's typically people who are already onboarding with us for immigration, or they're onboarding with us for corporate expansion. Then their company has a KRA pin, or they're onboarding with us for generational wealth with the family trust. So now their trust has a KRA pin, right? So depending on how they're approaching the situation, either their organization will have a KRA pin, and then the organization is buying the bonds for whatever goal they want to achieve. Or if they're doing immigration through us, even if they haven't come yet, right? So like that guy who said, "Oh, I'm coming in 2 years." If he came on board today, he would have a KRA pin by the end of the week, right? And then he would have a permit, so he'd be able to come and go from the country anytime he wants, even if he's not here, right? So that's how he would get that KRA pin. And then he would be able to go ahead and do this. But you don't just need a Kenyan bank account, you need a Kenyan bank account, and you need a bonds account with the Central Bank of Kenya. Both of those things require a KRA pin. So that's why typically it's not just random people abroad talking about, well, I just want to do the bond thing, because number one, all right, well, you're going to have to pay taxes in your home country if you bring the money back to your home country. So if you repatriate the money, you're going to have to pay taxes there, which defeat the purpose, especially if you've already paid taxes here. And then like there's the exchange rate. So sometimes the money's going to be different, right? Like sometimes the exchange rate is going to be low, sometimes it's going to be high. But if you're living here or you're doing business here or you're saving your generational wealth here, then the exchange rate doesn't matter, right? Only the return on investment rate and the compounding rate matters. So it just depends on which situation you're in. But yeah, you need a KRA pin. Ask about what do you want to ask about trust? We typically don't do domestic trust. We can assist, right? So we can write a trust template, but our lawyers are licensed in Kenya. Our lawyers are Kenyan lawyers, right? We do not have American lawyers for our clients, right? So we don't do any like American trust or UK trust or anything like that. You typically work with your local person for that if you need that kind of setup, right? Most people who need their domestic trust already have it by the time they come to us, because they really understand trust. And now they're looking for an offshore trust in their structure, and they come to us, and if they needed a domestic trust as well, they already have it. Some folks will, come back and say, all right, well, I need now, a domestic trust for X, Y, and Z, reasons. And we can give like a template on what our lawyers think that trust should look like. But that template is going to be just that, something that they need to bring to, at the very least, a paralegal, and get some legal advice locally, because there's going to be state laws that we don't know nothing about. Like, for example, there are a lot of trust, what they call trust busting attorneys. And one of the ways that they'll try to bust a domestic trust is to see if there's an accounting clause in that trust. Because a lot of states have state laws that say if there's no accounting clause in the trust, and then the state accounting clause becomes the accounting clause, and it's not actually trust friendly. So if your accounting doesn't match what the state says it should match, now I can crack your trust open and go after the assets inside of it, right? That doesn't work with the offshore trust, right? And we've had attorneys that don't understand international trust law think that they could come after our clients because there wasn't an accounting clause in there, and that it doesn't work that way with an international trust, right? So there are things, that are vice versa. There are things in people's states that we don't know, and because we don't have, state by state attorneys and U.S. attorneys, we just don't offer any U.S. legal advice or tax advice or anything like that. So we only set up the offshore trust. We do set up offshore trusts in multiple jurisdictions. Just U.S. jurisdiction isn't one of them. So we set up offshore trusts in, of course, Kenya. That was what we use for our generational wealth trusts. We set up offshore trusts in the Seychelles. That's more of an asset protection trust. We set up offshore trusts in Mauritius. That's more of a high value, high net worth individual type of trust. We set up trusts in Singapore. We set up trusts in Hong Kong. We set up trusts in the Seychelles. We set up trusts in Nevis, Cook Islands. I'm trying to think if we've done any other. We did Isle of Wight once or twice. So it just depends on what's going on with the person. But we don't do U.S. Isle of Wight is a special jurisdiction in the UK. It's not really UK for the purpose of trusts. So that's a little bit different. But yeah. So most of our stuff is focused. Most of our legal stuff is focused in Kenya. But once you onboard in Kenya, we can assist abroad in certain things. Do you have a recommended minimum for emergency fund? Yeah, your emergency fund should cover 3 months of your expenses. So you would have to sit down and check out what your expenses are, and your emergency fund should cover 3 months of your expenses. Now, here's the way that we typically do it. You can do it any way you want, right? But the way that we typically do it is, all right, first things first, emergency fund, 3 months expenses. All right, great, you got that. Now let's ladder some bonds that take care of your basic lifestyle, right? So, okay, now we got the bond laddering. Once the bond laddering is done, emergency fund extends to 6 months. So then you go back and you beef up the emergency fund, right? Now, once your emergency fund is at 6 months instead of 3 months, now you can start taking riskier investments, blue chips. I heard about this AI thing. I want to invest some money in, the semiconductors or Nvidia, or like something that's a little bit riskier where you could lose it all, but you'll always have your base and you have your 6 months of emergency fund at that point. Trying to do 6 months initially, that's almost impossible, right? So 3 months is hard, but it'll give you the discipline you need to then turn around and do your laddering. And then after you get your laddering done, going back and doing the 6 months is actually easy, right? Because your base won't always be your base. Like you're like, all right, I need 70,000 Kenyan shillings a month as my base, and then you'll start having 20,000 Kenyan shilling months where you just don't go eat out all like that. You don't have an electric bill, you don't have a water bill, you don't have a sewer bill. You spend most of your time that month at home. You go and you check your expenses. Oh, I only did 25,000 this month. All right. So then it becomes really, really easy to get that emergency fund up to 6 months. Past 6 months, you're killing yourself, right? Because you're losing money to inflation that's not working for you. So 6 months emergency fund is like the max, and then the money needs to be working for you, right? So it needs to be in mutual funds. It needs to be in IFTs. It needs to be in government bonds and treasuries. It needs to be maybe even in personal investments. If you want to invest in a specific company or the local bakery or whatever, that's fine. Just call our law firm and make sure that you have a legitimate subscription agreement and everything's legal. But your money needs to be working, and if it's not working, you're losing it to inflation. So you can have 100,000 in the bank. Oh, I got 100,000. The next month, you have less than 100,000 in buying power. The number might be the same, but the actual value of what that number represents isn't the same anymore, right? So unless you're making money at greater than inflation, you're losing money. So more than 6 months emergency fund, you're doing yourself a disservice. Typically, that's just our opinion. All right, it's not a fact, but that's just the way we look at it. Some people have a 6-year emergency fund. That's a lot of money. But there are people who do that. So they're losing buying power on 6 years worth of money every month. Every time inflation hits, they're losing buying power over. Some people are, got money under their bed. That money is literally getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We were talking earlier, Eddie, about me buying $500 Dodge Shadows in 1998. You can't get a $500 vehicle nothing now, right? So if I had the $500 sitting under my bed in 1998, and I could buy a Dodge Shadow with that, then I come back in 2008 and try to buy a car, I'm not getting nothing with that $500. So the $500 has shrunk, even though it's still the same, dollar amount. It's now smaller because it can't buy what it used to buy. So I got to make sure that if inflation is at 5%, my ROI is at least 6, right? And even that's like, ugh, right? What you really want is double. So if inflation is 5%, I really want my ROI to be 10% minimum, right? Which is why the bond market here is so nice, because the bond ROI is so large right now. But large bond ROI means that there's a demand for liquidity, right? So it won't always be that high. And you really only get those kind of deals in developing countries, but it won't always be that high. So it'll get to the place like it is in America, where you're getting 4 or 5%, maybe 6, 7 if you're lucky, on a bond, right? And again, if the percentage is less than inflation, you're losing money. Losing money. Don't lose money. You'll never outwork money. And never. Compounding is so ridiculous. You can never work harder than money. Never. So if you know how the rule of 70 or the rule of 72, they're actually similar. They're actually almost the same rule. It's just you're looking at it from two different directions. But if you understand either one of those rules and you know what your interest rate is, then you know how long it takes for your money to double, right? So that you know, killer Kenyan infrastructure bond, the one that you see every time you Google Kenyan tax exempt infrastructure bonds, the one that's 18.46% guaranteed return on investment. Ah, it's beautiful. If you apply the math, it doubles every 3 years and like 4 months, right? So that means if you put $100,000 in, let's just round down to three. I know we know it's more than three. All right, for the sake of the argument, let's round down to three, right? So let's say you put 100,000 in. In 3 years, it's 200,000. Okay, maybe you could have done that. Maybe you could have done that work, right? Okay. 3 years after that is 400,000. Right? You put 100,000 in 6 years is 400,000. All right. 3 years after that is 800,000. All right, that's 9 years. 3 years after that, we're at 12 years, right? What is it now? It's 1.6 million, right? So now in 12 years, your 100,000 has become 1.6 million. Now that's because that's an incredible, interest rate, right? But that's how that works, right? Now you have to have 100% dividend reinvestment plan. So you have to be reinvesting at the same interest rate. Okay, right. But you didn't add money to that, mind you. At no point in time did I say, oh, you're making monthly payment, not a 401k in that regard. You can do that, and that'll get you more money. But that is not a requirement of compounding, right? You will never outwork money, right? Because once you get to that 1.8, what happens the next time it jumps? It's 3.2 million. Well, what happens the next time that jumps? 6.4. Are we at 30 years yet? No, we're at 18. What happens when 6.4 jumps? Right, 12.8. Are we at 30 years yet? No, we're at 21. 12.8 million. Right? So you will never outwork money. Money will always outwork you. So your money should be put to work. That's why we won't, for us, it doesn't make a whole sense to go past a 6-month emergency fund. You should be able to work it out in 6 months. And if you can't work it out, then there's some external situation causing you to not work it out, and you wouldn't have to spend your emergency fund, right? So like we had folks during the pandemic. By the time it would have wiped out the emergency fund, all the stuff was in place. So they were getting the stimulus bonuses, and they were getting the unemployment, and they were getting the, whatever, and that was it. Yeah. This year, I feel like this year there's only been one that came out as an infrastructure bond. Infrastructure bonds are beautiful because they're tax exempt. I get it. They're beautiful. But bond tax is capital gain tax, so it's a smaller tax, that's the way it is everywhere in the world. That's why it's better to be an investor and an owner than a worker, because income tax sucks. and to a certain extent, even corporate tax sucks. But capital gains tax is normally about the best tax you can get. So it's also a final tax, which means that when you get the certificate that the tax has been paid, that's it, right? You don't technically have to even add it in your tax return because it's a final tax. You probably should, and your accountant will, right? But you wouldn't get in trouble for that, or there's no tax avoidance because you've already paid it, right? You could set yourself up in the situation depending on what kind of deductions you have, where maybe you get some of it back, maybe, right? But it's not so big of a thing to like avoid all bonds that are not infrastructure bonds. Infrastructure bonds are essentially just icing on the cake. And then the Safaricom bond isn't because Safaricom's not profitable. It's probably the most profitable telecommunications company in Kenya, right? So the Safaricom bond is a green bond where they're doing like green initiatives that don't have a whole lot to do with like their main business. So they're raising that money from the public. That's why, even though it's a private corporate bond, it's tax exempt because it's a green initiative bond, right? But the company has the money to pay the bond right now, right? So it's fairly safe. Now, your risk in all investing is that you can lose your entire investment. But the only way to lose a government bond is for the government to default, which essentially means that the government doesn't exist anymore. So that rarely happens. Corporate bonds have more risk, but when you're dealing with one of the number one companies, in the country, even that risk is diminished severely, right? So right now, there's a corporate bond that's open. Now, the way to get corporate bonds is a little bit different. So you would go to Safaricom's website. You can just Google it, Safaricom bond, green bond, or whatever, and you sign up through their web portal to get whatever. But you still need a central Kenyan bank account. So you still need a KRA pin, which means you still have to qualify for a KRA pin to be able to make that purchase. So there's that. But there are corporate bonds, and they typically have a classification on them. So like a class AAA corporate bond means that like Moody's or some authority on securities has said that this is like a top quality, bond, blah, 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 blah. So, but bonds are relatively safe and they're relatively easy to understand, right? Still want to get professional advice, in anything that you're doing. But they're relatively easy to understand and they're relatively safe. It's not like options, what I mean, where you're trying to figure out what a put is and what a call is, and like those are a little more complicated and definitely just let your professional handle them. But bonds are relatively safe and relatively easy because the whole purpose of them is for the government to raise money from the citizenry without using taxes, right? So it's a voluntary form of raising money for the government or for companies, where since the target is the citizenry, not brokers, it's typically set up so that it's very easy for general people to understand. But there's no like, it's not like every 3 months or every 6 months. There's no like, I can't give you like it happens this often. Last year, there were like 3 infrastructure bonds. So it just depends, I guess, on what's going on in the government and what the priorities are. And if they feel like they have a priority that's such a great need that they're willing to forego taxes for it. So the infrastructure bonds are really designed to build certain things inside of the country that's necessary, like electricity infrastructure, water infrastructure, that type of stuff, to the point where they're like, you know what, we need your help doing this, and so we're not going to charge you any tax on it. Just help us, essentially. And then if you're doing something great for the community and the economy, like Safaricom is pledging to do, then you can have a corporate bond that's tax exempt as well. So that had to go through the Capital Markets Authority, and they had to be approved that their bond was allowed to be tax exempt. In the United States, you can actually do the same thing. All right. It's called a 501c3 tax exempt bond. A lot of y'all got nonprofits that you actually shouldn't have had, that should have been that should have been public benefit corporations, but it is what it is. You got the nonprofit now, and you're now realizing that tax write-offs only matter to people who have enough money to owe taxes, and people ain't giving you money like you thought they would, and so you are able to raise money with 501c3 tax exempt bonds. You go through the same process. Typically, you go to the governor of your state or the attorney general of the state, and then you go through a process by which the state would certify that your bonds are allowed to be tax exempt. Then you bring that certification to the Fed, and blah, 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 blah. And then you're able to sell debt because there is no equity in a nonprofit. There are no shares. So you cannot go to a VC and raise equity money. So you have to go raise debt money. A lot of folks don't know about that. It's complicated though. Got to get it a professional. We used to do that before. If you're a long time follower of Diaspora Freedom Initiative, you know that we used to do government contracts and nonprofits and grant writing and all of that stuff. So something that we used to do back in the day in another life. Any other questions about any of that? Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you. Yep. He died 5 days ago, so I do appreciate that. We knew it was coming, but it still sucks. So, but yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Oh, thank you, Eddie. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's a lot, huh, Eddie? I be throwing stuff at you. There's typically always a way to get money. Typically, always a way. Just gotta. Typically, what happens is you just don't know about it. But there's typically always a way to get money. Well, the Dunkin' Donuts guy, he made 1.27 million on his first deal in Kenya, but he's an anomaly, right? Everybody can do it. Most people just don't do it, right? But he's an anomaly. It took him 18 months. He embraced the word no. He started keeping track of it. I remember he called me. He was like, "That was my 1,000th no." He was excited, which is the energy that you need to have, because the more you hear a no, the closer you are to the yes. But he was trying to sell coffee beans, and he started. I guess like anybody would start. He tried to like call the grocery stores and like Walmart and stuff, and like Kenyan coffee is amazing, you know. And they didn't care because they have buying departments and procurement departments, and like that's not the way that works with them. And so it took months and months until he figured out that small family owned or single owner or no more than 3 location coffee shops, that part of their marketing strategy is they get up at 5 in the morning and start roasting coffee so that the neighborhood can smell that coffee roasting, and then they come in and they get a bacon, egg, and cheese sandwich and some swanky coffee, Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee, Ethiopian coffee, Kenyan coffee is on the same level. Coffee snobs know that. Regular people don't, but coffee snobs know that. And so once he figured out that that was actually the target, he got, I want to say it was 13 of them, maybe 19 of those guys on board. And so he like called them directly and all that. And then he got with what's called the XM Bank. EXIM stands for Export Import Bank of the United States of America. It's owned by the government. And the XM Bank financed the entire deal, offered all the U.S. companies working capital line of credit, which they didn't even know they could touch before. And that first deal was a $1.27 million deal. So, from Dunkin' Donuts to millionaire, it took 18 months. Over 1,000 no's. that most people won't get past 100 no's. But it was a mindset shift. He understood that yes was on the other side of the nose, and that he was learning something from every no. And so he went to, oh, well, you sell Folgers, why won't you sell my stuff? To, oh, wait a minute, it doesn't even make sense for them to want my stuff. I got the best. This is one of the top coffees in the world. So, I need to go to people who understand that. I need to go to value buyers, not price buyers, who are going to try to compare what I'm selling to a cup of instant coffee from Folgers, right? So that's what it takes. It takes figuring that out, figuring out who your target is or whatever. But once you got that figured out, he had no money in it at all. He was making calls over Google Voice back to America, trying to pre-sell, raw beans, and that was it. So a lot of time, when you don't have money, you got to invest time. He invested a lot of time, but not a cent of money did he invest into that deal until the deal closed. And the deal closed at 1.27 million. So it just depends on your mindset. The money's out there. You just got to know where to find it. Most people don't even know XM Bank exists. Most people don't know that every country has an XM Bank. They just don't always call it XM Bank. So if you Google XM Bank plus the name of the country, you'll typically end up at either one or two websites, because some countries have a private XM Bank and a government XM Bank. And so there are organizations just set up to give you money once you seek them out and meet their criteria. And typically with an XM Bank, that criteria is either there's importing going on or exporting going on. So yeah, you just gotta want it. That's all there is to it. You just gotta want it. You get to a point where once your mindset has matured, you realize that everything else was bullshit and excuses. If you want it, you'll do it, and if you don't want it, you won't. And that's really all there is to it, because the assistance is definitely there. Yeah. XM Bank is a nice little resource. All right. Any other questions? YouTube, you've been jumping today. You've been jumping. Oh, wait a minute. No. Eddie, are you on Facebook? Is that Facebook or are you on YouTube? I think it is YouTube. YouTube's been jumping. Facebook, you're doing all right. TikTok is normally way more engaging. You know what? I guess it's midnight in the United States. You're on YouTube. All right. Yeah, YouTube's been jumping today. Facebook, you've been doing your thing today. TikTok, you've been real quiet. Real quiet, TikTok. I guess it's midnight in the U.S. It's 11:55. All right, on the East Coast. So I guess that makes sense. Used to be I got the most engagement on TikTok, which is where people would be asking me questions for hours. They keep me here for 4 hours if I let them. But we had the wedding of our estate planning attorney yesterday, so there's still stuff to be done. Is what another company that I own? Oh, this? No, this is the insurance company that I use and all my employees get. It's Britam Insurance. It's 12:55 a.m. there. Okay, are you East Coast Crown Fit then? And Eddie, what are you in, like Ohio or something? You Central Time? So yeah, Britam, and then the Malili plan is a plan that we utilize through Britam, and that's just it. They just gave me this because whatever. Toronto. Okay, cool. Yeah. You guys think I own everything? No, I don't. I wish I owned Britam. I don't own Britam, but they're good. I just had a what is it called? A lithroscopy. So I had a kidney stone, and it was stuck, and it was painful. Um, they say it's comparable to giving birth. I don't know how true that is, but I believe it because it was wild. Um, and and so they went in with the laser and like demolished the stone, and then they were like, "Yo, that stone was serious. It's a fluke, though. You only have one." They did like a chemical comparison of the stone. They were like, "Something happened, some kind of fluke. You don't have any stones in the other kidney. There's no stones in the same kidney that had the stone, but that stone was a doozy." So they put a stent. It's called a double J stent. So they put this stent, and so one part of the stent is actually in your kidney, and then it goes all the way down. The other part of the stent is in your bladder, and they left it in for 6 weeks so that I could heal without having scars. And they just pulled it out like last week or whatever. So anyway, this crazy laser surgery thing that left no scars at all anywhere on my body cost a half a million Kenyan shillings, and Britam paid all of it. I paid 70 shillings because I got an ocean view room. So if you go if you go back and you look at my social media, you'll see the view of the ocean from my hospital room. So I upgraded to an ocean view room. Cost me, $70. I'm sorry, $70. But that was it. That's all I paid. And then I just went back. I had the extraction done, which was really really quick. But I still had to go into anesthesia and all of that to get the stent, the double J stent removed, and that cost me nothing. Right. So I love Britam. Just a great insurance company. I've never paid anything except the vaccine schedule here is different, and that's every country. Their vaccine schedules are different. So there are certain things that you don't get vaccinated for here that are an issue, especially now in the U.S. And so, like my dad just died, and so things like that. If I were to have to take a trip back to the U.S. and bring my son, I wouldn't want him to get like rubella, mumps, measles, whatever. They do mumps, measles, but they don't do like rubella here. So there's certain little vaccinations that I like added on because he's gonna go to America semi often just for family stuff. We also go to China twice a year. We go to the Caribbean like once a year as well, just for like family business stuff. So there were extra vaccinations that it made sense for him to have, and so we pay out of pocket for that. But even that was incredibly affordable. So yeah, Britam. Britam is the insurance company that myself and my employees get. I'm right on the border of East and Central. Oh, okay, cool. All right. So is that it? Anybody got any other questions for me? I've been here for 2 hours, 32 minutes, and 14 seconds. Anybody got any other questions for me about any of this stuff? How to make it happen? My niece just got over measles and that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So they do have the measles and they do have the mumps, but they don't. It's not MMR. It's just measles, mumps out here. So I mean, he got MMR. Yeah, man. Yeah. All right. Anything else from any of you guys? Any questions? Anything that you need assistance on? Business hours. We use the East African, so it's like 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. but like East African time. So you got to figure out what that is where you are. What you should really probably do is just set up a discovery call. So just go, to my site and discovery calls are free, and then we can in the discovery call we can let you know exactly what we can or can't do for you, and that's like the purpose of them. If you already know that we can help you, just set up an initial consultation. It does cost, but that's just really to keep people from wasting our time. We give a credit for that cost to your services, so in the end it's free. But we used to get calls all the time from people who just like wanted to talk, you know and so we just couldn't allow that. So our initial consultations do have a cost, but it gets credited back to you. What's the home ownership cost for a 4-bed bungalow? and an acre. Okay, really that question is not answerable, but I'm going to add caveats to the question to make it answerable, just so that you get like an idea in your head, right? So we do a lot of building by the beach. This is Deani Beach where I live now. A beach right next to Deani Beach, Galu Beach. We're building 5 places right now. Someone's about to buy an acre lot from us and build a homestead there. So I'll break it down based on this, where you're within 15 minutes walking of the beach. You're in a tourist area that has everything and modern medicine, and you're not in the bushes somewhere where it's going to take you an hour to get to a hospital. And you have access to hot water and all of that stuff, electricity, internet, 5G, all of that, right? So location changes price. So that's the location I'm going to talk to you about. And so that, as you said, a 4 bedroom. So that house at a 4 bedroom on an acre would be, the house would be 225 standard, right? So $225,000 standard for that would be 2,500 square foot house. Now to get the acre, typically an acre near the beach is relatively expensive. However, this client that's looking at an acre, they're going to get the acre at right around $90,000, right? So if it was the standard house, 4 bedroom, 2,500 square foot, 4 bedroom house at 225, and then that acre, they're looking at like 315 total. So $315 total, if my math is right on the fly here. So right in that range. Now, if you want a smart house, it costs more, of course, but smart houses are the bomb. Smart house, everything in the house is the highest quality. The house talks to you. The toilets talk to you. They wipe your butt for you, literally. They wash you, clean you. The temperature control, the doors, everything in the house is just smart. Everything is top of the line. So smart houses are essentially, double. Sometimes, depending on what you're doing, a little bit more. But smart houses are essentially double what a standard house is because of all the technology. So with the smart house, you're looking at 550, and then the land doesn't change. So the 690 if you go for a smart house. So 690. You could also do a standard mini mansion for like the same amount, right? So people sometimes juggle that. The mini mansion is 5,000 square feet. It's a really big house. Still 4 bedrooms, unless you want more, you can do that. But it's a luxury house, so there are luxury amenities. So there's a family room and a living room and an office and a library and a chef's kitchen plus your kitchen. It's that. So it depends on what people are looking for. And you're asking on TikTok. I might be able to show you. Hold on. For the rest of you guys, I'm sorry. TikTok has some features that other things don't have, but I'm pretty sure there's a way for me to show you things on TikTok, like show you pictures of things on TikTok. So let me just see. Yeah, here we go. Let's see if I can show you. Okay. Actually, this will work. Maybe I can let's see how this looks. Okay, let me get my head out. All right, so This guy up here, that's a pool being built, and next to it is a 6 bedroom duplex that cost like 390,000. And this guy down here, I wish I could like the guy right above my head here. That's your 4 bedroom, 2,500. That thing that you see on the top is actually a family theater. So it blocks out all the heat from the sun. It's waterproof, and there's a daylight projector, and one of the walls is set up for projection. There's an actual home theater on the top there. So that kind of gives you, and these are both walking distance from the beach. Let me see if I can grab some other photos for you. Sorry for you other guys who can't see. Let me see if I can just show it to you a little bit. So these are two different houses we're building right now. I'll show you over here on YouTube as well. I don't know if you can see it. Jeez. So sorry about that. That functionality is not on those two platforms. It's one thing with TikTok. It does have some pretty decent functionality. But since a question was asked on TikTok, the answerer can see pretty clearly what's going on. Here's another view of that 4 bedroom for you. But it's like not show. So this picture actually shows the entire house, but when I superimpose it, it's only showing you the middle. Let me see if there's another way to show pictures that'll actually give me what I'm looking for here. So you can see the whole thing. No, it doesn't look like there's any other way. So that kind of sucks because you're not really seeing the full picture. There used to be a way to like hold up your hand and the picture would be in your hand, but I don't see that option. So anyway, I was trying to show you a little something, but it looks like I don't have the ability to do that. Oh wait, I think I just found it. Yes, there it is. Okay. All right, let me get back to that picture so I can show it to you in a better way. Okay, so what that picture actually looked like. So now you can kind of see the whole thing. That section in the back is a pool that they want to put in later. So we prepped for the pool. And on top of the building there is a generator. You can see the solar panels, of course. So there's a backup generator there in the top. And that would be the size of building that you were talking about. But that's on a 50 by 100, right? So that is not on an acre. So a 50 by 100 is an eighth of an acre. Hey, Eddie boy, what's going on? Oh, okay, cool. So you, so you came over, you can see it over here. Cool, cool, cool. Let me see if I can show you like the duplex and then even show you our smaller house so you can kind of get a feel for that. What is that? Okay. So this on the left hand side is that I showed you. Oh, I'm sorry that it's like shaking. On the right hand side is actually a 2 bedroom. So it's a 2 bedroom. That's actually, ooh, sorry, actually a smart house. Ooh, okay, that's actually a smart house. That what it will be when it's done. And it's a 2 bedroom with a massive office on the first floor, and that office is blocked off completely from the rest of the house, right? So if people come to your office, they can use the bathroom that's connected to the office, and they can sit down in your office and do business with you. And, but that's it. They can't get in your house. So there's a front door style door between the office and the house, so like a big steel security door. And that way your office can be like all glass. So even if somebody was trying to like break in and they broke the glass, like they still wouldn't be able to get in your house. They would have just made it into your office. And then let's see if I can get you. Yeah, that's fine. This is actually way further along at this point. It's actually done now. But this is the Duke bedroom, 6 and 2 half bath. The person has a investor permit, and this is purely for Airbnb. They're not even, they don't relocate to Kenya. They're not living here, none of that. So we build all kinds of stuff. Those are like among our last 5 builds. Antoine, you'll actually see those. Oh, you're not here anymore. Okay. But Antoine's coming on Monday, so he'll actually see those in person. And Antoine's actually looking for an acre. So maybe you'll get to see Antoine's build if he allows people to see it. Here's one of the things that we run into all the time. Because we have the law firm, once people on board, like once they actually, oh, let me turn that off. Once they actually on board and they're like with us, um, then there we go. Then the attorney-client privilege sets in. So people will be like, well, let me see this, let me see that. So only certain people will give us a release to like show people our stuff. What we've started doing is the people who asked to see it, we're like, all right, cool, we're gonna like hound some of our farmer clients to like give us a release to show it, but as part of that we want you to give us a release preemptively so that the next person gets to see your stuff, because we do a lot of like these trust fund estates and all of that stuff, and people just like they don't want people to know exactly where their trust fund is at and where their trust estate is at, and we're just barred from specifically going out there and being like, here's James's whatever, because part of that process was a legal process, and so it's protected. So that sucks because a lot of some of our competitors don't have a legal team at all. All they do is like concierge work for relocations. So they're showing everything online, and all these people that they brought because they don't have a legal conflict. But we do legal work and make sure our people are okay like forever. And so because of that, privilege does set in. So we're always happy when somebody wants to give us a waiver so that we can show some stuff off, because that's definitely the weakest part of our proof of concept, marketing. What's the worst type of weather you encounter on the coast? Rain. Some places on the coast it floods. So when you said, we encounter, I'm talking about Deani. We have pretty strong irrigation systems. Oh, it's a tourist area, so a lot of the things that are built here are built from a tourist mindset. So we have proper drainage because our engineers like thought about that. So you'll go to other places on the coast that are not tourist focused, and their engineers didn't think about drainage. So when it rains, it floods, and like people lose their lives. That doesn't happen here because of the way we design the area. So, but rain, when there's a hurricane, there's some kind of natural formation. I think it's actually a trench. That like if something is coming across the Indian Ocean, when it hits that trench, it drops off and it never makes it here. So even when there's like a typhoon or something, we just get rain. And that's it. I don't ever remember an earthquake or anything like that. There's no tornadoes. Very rarely is there even an electrical storm. But it's just rain. So it's rain and tropical weather here. There are other places in Kenya that have like mudslides and stuff like that. We don't have anything like that. Yeah, yeah, it's nice here. Ah, okay, okay. Well, I grew up in a place called Berks County, which is outside of Philadelphia, and we had a few tornadoes as well. Normally, we were in a valley, so we were typically protected. It's called the Lehigh Valley. No, it's called Susquehanna Valley. I'm sorry, Lehigh Valley is next door. But in our valley, the tornadoes typically didn't jump the mountain. Um, but if we went to like there's a little town called Ole. Ole's on the other side of the valley. They would get hit by tornadoes all the time. It's crazy. But yeah, Pennsylvania does get tornadoes. And we have earthquakes, which is also weird. Not often. Um, we had 3 in my lifetime. So, but we do get these weird earthquakes from time to time. there's a place called Ashland, about an hour away from where I grew up. And there's been a fire burning underground, I think for 100 years now. Crazy. All right, yeah, yeah. There's been a Ashland. There's been a fire burning. I think it's 100 years. You can Google it. It's been burning for a very long time. And every time they try to put it out, they make it worse. So they've stopped doing that. So they've like evacuated everybody from Ashland. But yeah, yeah, it's like a coal mine that was underground, and they were like putting trash in like abandoned coal chutes. I don't know who thought that was a good idea, and somehow it lit on fire, and so the coal has been burning underground there for a very long time. It's interesting that fires can last so long, especially underground. But so yeah, I'm definitely no stranger to extreme environmental conditions and weather. We had, what was it, 2007, when we had, it was like, man, 6 feet of snow or something like that. It was crazy. You come out the house, if you had a porch, you could come out of the house, and you couldn't see the cars at all. It's just snow. And then you thought you knew where your car was, and you dug out, and then you ended up digging out someone else's car. You still didn't have your car dug out. It was a mess. So yeah, definitely no stranger to extreme weather. But yeah, I live in paradise, quite frankly. Yeah, I hear you on that. I hear you on that. I'm right there with you. Is Marcel awake? Okay. All right, guys. Anything else you guys got for me? Going on 3 hours here. We still got some wedding stuff going on that we got to take care of today. So I'm a bit busy today. Anything else? Thank you again for your time. Not a problem, Eddie. Thank you. Anything else going on? Any questions you got? If you're asking a question, just drop a one in the chat and I'll wait for you. Or just like press enter, even though it's like half the question, and I'll wait for you to finish it or whatever. Any other questions? All right. Looks like we are good. All right, guys. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm going to go ahead and end the live, and you should see me around the same time tomorrow morning for me, tomorrow night for most of you. We'll talk again soon.